first time ever.
Hear you loud and clearly.
And it was going place.
That stuff's great.
But the game is not a roguelike.
Boomer shooter.
Bang.
Hello, this is John St. John, and you're listening to KEEP in the Keep, bringing you all the hits from the finest in the world of gaming and entertainment. Now sit back and relax as the drowned god Cthulhu lulls your mind with the tastiest talk in town.
Welcome to another chapter of In the Keep podcast. I'm your very own prophet of the drowned god, the Motherlode. The Keep is a collective of gaming enthusiasts compelled by the drowned god Cthulhu to frag and jib one another into oblivion for all eternity. Alright, we are joined by our lovely guest today. This is the sound designer panel, so we have Ben from In the Keep, and then we have Jonas and Magnus from 3D Realms, and I would like to hear everybody kind of introduce yourselves and just go around the table. Who's first? Jonas is
Not
first.
me.
I'm first. All right, yeah. I'm Jonas. I am an audio designer at 3D Realms and Slipgate Ironworks, where we're working on basically all the audio, weapons, magic, whatever they might need. We're there to design it and help implement it and make sure that everything works as it should. And yeah, that's basically what we do.
Yeah.
Magnus?
Yes, my name is Magnus, and I'm also a sound designer at Slipgate, and I guess Jonas pretty much described what we do at an everyday basis.
Am I saying your name wrong?
Always.
Is it Magnus or Magnus? I don't know how to pronounce it correctly.
Yeah, that was a clean pronunciation. Yeah, I guess in Danish it would be Magnus, but in English it's Magnus, I guess.
Okay, well, whatever,
I don't know
man.
if it's a rare name in the States.
Yeah, it is. It's like, the only famous Magnus is Magnus Carlsen, right? For us, anyway, that I can think of. But we agreed that when I get to Denmark, we're going to play chess, and you're going to school me, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Definitely.
for sure.
And Ben, you want to introduce yourself to the guest for the 18th time now?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Ben. I'm also sound designer. More on the side, not in my main job, but I basically do weird shit in the woods. So mostly I'm into field recording, so going out there and recording with different microphones. I have a whole bunch already, and I'm adding to my collection. And I'm doing currently the sound design for Call of the Ragnar and Stellar Valkyrie for In the Keep games.
Sick. Well, I've got a few icebreaker questions from some of their Patreon supporters and such, so I'm going to just go ahead and start with those, and then we'll get the conversation flowing and let all you guys do your crazy technical talk that I'm sure I won't understand. It should be fun. The first question comes from Vince Steele, and he says, this goes to everyone, what kind of research and reference material is the most helpful for you guys when you're crafting the aesthetic of a game, if any at all?
Personally, I would say the concept art is really good at giving an idea of what the mood should be of the game. And in general, just seeing all the work from the different people, like 3D assets and all that, it all helps give you an idea of what direction you want to go in, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's very important when we try to decide on an audio direction that that we look at all the concept art and everything that might help us give us an idea of more like the feel that you're going for. Oftentimes in audio design, you don't necessarily, you will be inspired by the authentic sounds, let's say if you make environments, of course you're going to, if it's in a forest, you're going to want, trees and wind and everything that you would expect. But sometimes you also want to go with what sounds right instead of what sounds authentic, and sometimes be creative and more try to lighten the mood. For example, if you have a stylized forest, you might fill it up with the sound of birds chirping and singing if you want it to be sort of like upbeat and magical in a sense. But you can also quickly make a forest very dark and very have that sort of grimdark atmospheric. It's kind of haunted out here, and yeah, we very much try to also sit down and play around in, for example, levels or with anything that we design for, to sort of get a feel for how does it actually feel when you swing a sword in the game or walk around in an environment that's been designed, and try to also talk to game designers and directors to sort of what are we trying to do here.
The game genre also very like shapes what the sound's gonna be like. If it's like an RTS or versus like an RPG kind of game, that would change also how the sounds would end up sounding in the end. Definitely.
Yeah, man, I agree with you both. I'm also going from the concept art in the beginning, and then there's stuff like especially for like enemies or NPC, then the animation becomes really important to me, to see how much weight is behind the movements or something like that, to touch on that area. And but also like the back and forth with the designers or the lead is very important to establish what kind of feeling you want to have. Because as you said, you can make a forest really friendly and really happy sounding, or you can make it really dark and brooding just by the sound and don't change the visuals at all. So yeah, there's some kind of conversation is always needed to find the right spot.
There's something interesting that we I think we talked about this a little bit when you were on the Call of Sir Ragnar's dev blog thing, but how semantic do you really get? And something that I think Jonas brought up also was like trying to be super authentic is not always the best approach. Because you and I were talking about like, okay, so like hypothetically, right, in Stellar Valkyrie on these different planets, the atmosphere would be different than it is on Earth, and therefore everything should sound wrong. Like how much, and what do alien birds sound like and all that kind of shit. But in reality, it needs to sound like something that pleases the person listening to it, and they have to understand what it is. It can't be just totally out there. And that comes down to even, like weapon sound design. So the famous example being like the shotgun in Doom, they slam a door and that becomes the sound of a shot. Like gunshots in media, period, not just in games, are almost never actually gunshots. And so we have this conditioned idea in our head of what something would or should sound like, even though that's not really what it does sound like. It's about getting the reaction out of a person that you want.
Yeah, and absolutely. And the sound of something, or to change the sound of something takes years, because the audience is kind of used to some kind of style for certain sounds, especially for gun sounds. There are, I'm not really sure yet what the title was, but there are some movies that try to go in a different direction or in a more natural direction, and even those are just doing like small increments to get a bit away from the mainstream sound that people are used to, and it doesn't always work because oftentimes people just say, the guns sound really weak, or I don't know. So that's always a trade-off. We talked about the Call of the Ragnar thing, because there I try to record as much authentic stuff as I can, and oftentimes you have to at least mix something else in there with it to make it fit, to make it feel right. But there you can really see where the limits of the real sound lies, because some sounds are just like very boring in real life.
Definitely.
That's also like a very cool example of also using, for example, using how you like humans have this, what would you say, like the sound of like a predator, something like, for example, let's say a lion roar. You will sometimes hear in movies where you have a car chase scene, and sometimes they cut to like the sort of the bad guys in the car, and they drive over, and I've heard some movies where sometimes it's subtle, but some people like to just crank that up where you hear the sound of the engine, but they mix like a layer of this lion roar into it to sort of give it this sort of predatory kind of sound to it as well.
Yeah.
And you can sometimes use these, what would you say, like the associations that people have to certain sounds to be like, oh, the bad guys are therefore predators, and all these like subtle ways that oftentimes sounds will be used. I think it was also the TIE fighters in Star Wars.
Yeah, Star Wars, yeah. The snake sounds, I think, right?
NASCARs, right?
You're also kind of touching on the subject of, I believe it's called cross-media literacy, where you kind of like, from watching a lot of different media like films and playing games, you get accustomed to certain kind of ways to do things, and so we kind of expect a certain kind of behavior or sound for other games that are like it. And it's a kind of interesting subject, especially if like when is the right time to break away from the kind of cross-media literacy. And it's related also to a study that Jonas and I once did, where we tested all kinds of different audio, what's it called, kind of models, I guess. And one example was the cross-media literacy, which was really fun to kind of test around with.
Yeah, it's all about expectations. I think, for example, if someone sits down with a game the first time, I heard about, for example, the very first Final Fantasy game back when it came out. They had two battle music tracks, one for like regular enemies, and then one sort of like boss battle track. And then the final boss would just use the boss battle track, whereas later on they did like a remake for the PSP, and they made this, or this is as far as I've been able to read at least, that they made a proper final boss soundtrack for that, because when the more games you've played, you expect the final boss to have that its own track, its own what would you say, like identity in terms of like audio and visuals, music, and it's one of the things where, like, if people haven't played a lot of games, they might sit down with the game and it's just using the boss battle track for the final boss, and they won't notice. Whereas other people will be like, well, that seemed like a pretty lazy approach. Why wouldn't they make a final boss track? And so that, it's like the more that you engage with a certain media, the more you sort of develop this kind of literacy. And that's the sort of thing you have to take into consideration when designing audio. And also, as Magnus said, like, when is the right time to sort of break away from these, like what's just always been done to sort of make a sound like the thing, even if it's a completely different source than the authentic source for a sound, for example. And knowing when to sort of play into the associations, and also trying to develop something unique is a big thing, when deciding how you want to go about the design of a certain enemy weapon, like anything really you can imagine. But it's fun to sort of be creative with like we had we did some work recently where we got a bit more abstract and creative with some environment design. And it was definitely very fun trying to sort of capture the mood, and instead of just going for like your standard, say for example that let's say you are making the sounds for like you have a haunted mansion. You don't just want it to be filled with like room tones and stuff, right? You want it to have all these weird sounds everywhere that you can't quite pinpoint where it is, to sort of give you this feeling of paranoia. and this lets you, like, when you get stuff like that make a haunted house. It's like, oh well, we don't really have sources for haunted houses, but you sort of have like the feeling of someone watching you from behind maybe, and you can do a lot of things with sounds, placing it around to sort of give that mood and that sense of
lent from horror movies as well.
Yeah.
And all the different principles they use for sound editing, like like sub bass, for example, is where it's associated with like something heavy, like some kind of presence, and we utilized that heavily in our last level, as Jonas said. And it's kind of fun to. Yeah, sorry.
No, you go ahead. I thought you were.
It's kind of fun to. Also, as Jonas mentioned at the start, where it's like realism versus kind of driving home a point, and it's fun to sometimes say, okay, fuck realism, let's just focus on kind of driving home a point or enforcing a narrative or something. Can I cuss?
Oh yeah,
okay,
it's my podcast. You know me, man.
Yeah, okay. This is PG-13. Okay.
It's easier to ask for forgiveness than permission.
Yeah, I could edit it out if I wanted to, but I assure you, this will be the least. This will be the tamest podcast I've done in forever, especially the one I released today. Good God Almighty, it got demonetized on YouTube, just because, which is fine. I don't fucking care, But my grandma does listen to the show, so you can keep that in mind.
Oh,
sorry, Grandma Ty.
Yeah,
grandmother load.
Exactly.
No, you can cuss all you want, man. One of the things that I wanted to bring up, and curious how you guys approach this. So you're talking about the ambient sounds in a haunted house or anything like that. Like there's this phrase we use a lot where it felt like the air got sucked out of the room, like the pressure change, right? And even touching on what we were saying earlier with, even if you're on a different planet, but in these moments in the story of whatever you're playing, be like Fight Club, right? The moment when you realize that he's not real, like Tyler Durden isn't real, he's the narrator, and then there's that whole we've just lost cabin pressure moment.
Yeah.
How do you how do you go about making the sound of the air in the room? Is that even something you take into consideration?
I think, like for example, the room tones we use for various places.
Mm-hmm.
Are not just like the same room tone. It changes depending on the size of the room that we're in to kind of create the feel of not just like the natural echo and reverberation of the room, but also kind of this feeling of pressure. For example, in a haunted house, you would have this intense pressure, and I guess something like filtering and EQing could already be a good starting point.
Yeah, you can also play with contrast. For example, say you have a haunted house, but it's in this area, let's say a foresty area or something, and you might use it to your advantage to just make the forest sound like exactly what you would expect, give it as natural and authentic a sound as you want. But as soon as you move into the haunted house, it doesn't sound anything like what you'd expect, and you immediately just feel that contrast and just have that. Oh shit, something's wrong here. We don't really want to be in here, but of course, the game dictates this is the way. Maybe the door shuts behind you. Tough luck. That's a lot you can do with audio. I actually played a while back. I played Penumbra, the precursor to Amnesia.
Yeah.
And a funny thing that I noticed, right in the beginning, when you come down into this mine shaft, just before you've gotten in there, there's this metal hatch in the door that you have to open. But as you go into the room where this hatch is, something growls and knocks on this thing, really bam, and you're like, oh shit, I don't want to go down there. And then of course you find out, oh, I have to go down there, and isn't that nice? But the first time you go down there, you have this dark path ahead of you, but I figured out that the entire area, it sounds like there are monsters lurking around, and you're walking very slowly forward, or maybe you're not walking forward at all. of course, I'm brave and walk forward after about 10 minutes. But no, I went around the whole place and I figured out that there was actually no enemies. Like in terms of like game design, they weren't introduced in the enemies yet, but they gave you just purely with like audio design and of course, using visuals, like you couldn't see very far ahead. That was the sort of what's in the dark, and using the audio, they sort of gave you the sense of there's monsters lurking just around the corner everywhere, and you're not safe.
Another way
that was kind of a cool thing, I thought, where it was just purely audio that was just freaking you out. No monsters at all.
Penumbra and Amnesia really are very high in audio quality. As far as I'm concerned, I loved all those games, and I think it was in one of the Amnesia games where they also did something with the room tones. As you mentioned earlier, Ty, you just lost cabin pressure. You can also like change the whole feeling of the place if you suddenly just lose the room tone and go to silence.
Yeah.
Because there's always like this noise in the back, and you don't really realize it if you're not an audio guy and not constantly like taking care of listening exactly where something is. But you have this room that sounds like this room, like for an hour of gameplay, this whole mansion sounds like this, and then there's some kind of story moment, and suddenly there's silence, and you just notice the silence. And you notice there's something missing, but you don't know what is missing. Something is just wrong here, because silence is wrong in real life. You don't have silence anywhere. And that can be a very powerful thing to do.
It's like if you're sleeping and you have like a fan on or some kind of white noise, and it when it goes off, it wakes you up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's just as effective as if you walked in and started playing a trumpet,
Yeah. And that ties in the whole using animal noises. That's also a thing that gets you subconsciously. And where you can I think that's been a long-standing tradition in film to mix animal noises and all kinds of machinery and spaceships, for example, to make the good guys and the bad guys stand off. There are a couple of psychoacoustic tricks to do stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah. That's.
Yeah. I was also about to mention silence is a really nice tool. It's the same when you hear like in a forest where suddenly there are no birds. It's like, what happened? Where is all the life? And it can also be like work on almost like a metaphorical plane where it's like there's no life here because something lurks or something. Again, if it's like a haunted house or something.
Yeah, that's also like when you know that like animals like before an earthquake, for example, it's like. Oftentimes, the animals sort of feel all these sub frequencies or something, and they get the hell out. So when you're suddenly there, and all the animals were like ahead of you, being see ya, you're like, oh, guess it's just me here. Then nice.
Something's wrong.
Like even more accentuated especially with silence as the powerful tool. Like when you remove it, it's especially in horror games where, like, if you're really immersed in it, like you might not want to say something because you feel like even your own voice might startle whatever is out there. So like when you take away all the audio, your own sounds get even more accentuated, like you hear yourself more, and like you're trying to be even more silent and you get even more tense. So it's a particularly powerful tool.
You can also
hear your heartbeat suddenly.
Exactly. You can also use like the David Lynch approach and sometimes just skew like the balance of something. So if, for example, the room tones gets too loud, that's like a classic David Lynch thing where his room tones are really, really loud and very like dominant in the sonic picture. And that also creates like this weird, uncanny feel because the room tone wouldn't be loud at all. So that's definitely also a fun approach. It's kind of skewing the balance. So like also like Jonas said, suddenly you hear your own sounds way more. Maybe you even like increase it with the volume just to create like this feeling of just like what's happening, something is wrong.
Yeah, that was actually like a very fun assignment we did. We went to a Sonic College where we studied sound design. And a very fun assignment that we had was we got like a word or something that we had to communicate audibly. And the group I was working with, we were tasked with anxiety. And what we chose to do was sort of with some recording techniques. We went down into the cafeteria during a break and did some recordings. And so you just start by hearing like this cafeteria noise, people talking. And then we had like these lavalier mics, and we just took one each, like two guys, and went out into each side of the room. And you got like this sort of zooming effect, like you were being like pulled into the sonic picture. And then we made like this low pass on it, sort of feeling like you're in the head of someone, put up these sort of, breaths, irregular breaths of someone sitting there and feeling this anxiety. And one of the things that we did as well, kind of like, turning up the volume of a room tone, was like we put in these like unnaturally loud sounds of like glasses clinking and people walking by, and it was like like these, it sounded massive, and it was sort of like someone just getting this, I don't know, sort of like trying to audibly communicate a phobia for crowded spaces, and that was a really fun task to try and sort of audibly express such feelings, and I think it goes very well into sort of when you try to capture a mood or capture a feeling in a place and try to get the player to feel a certain way using just audio. I think there's a lot that you can do to really get creative with. Like not on all, some levels will require you to be more authentic, have the more authentic approach, but it's very fun when you get to have these more creative, abstract like sessions and designs that you can do.
Have you seen the film Uncut Gems?
Nope.
No, nobody.
No, not
Okay.
yet. No.
So what you were saying earlier about having every like all the little sounds in the room suddenly be very loud, like the clinking of a glass or whatever. That movie, in my just total, armchair quarterback here estimation, is like a fantastic audio design in general. Like it's. You said the word anxiety, and it reminded me of the movie because this movie is so completely like about exactly what you just said, like creating the tension and the anxiety of this guy who's basically a gambling addict, he's like addicted to the deal, right? And he's always getting himself into trouble, like probably legal and maybe criminal trouble, because he's always, constantly working on getting that next fix of like selling something or moving something. And they do that by exactly what you just said. Like there's no point in the movie where that's not always prominent. Every sound is just like so crushing, and that's true. And I think that's a human evolution thing. Like when you are anxious and stressed out, you suddenly pick up on things that ordinarily just blend into the background because you're looking for the threat. And that's such a brilliant way. I mean, kudos to you, man. That is a truly brilliant way to like create that through sound.
It's the same when you watch a horror movie and then you go upstairs for a glass of water or something, and suddenly you're in the mindset of fear. So every sound becomes like suspicious and the water dripping, and like just like you mentioned, like every sound that would normally just fall in the background, suddenly you're acutely aware of everything.
It's like that. It's tapping into sort of that primal fear of like the brain will filter out sounds like a rustling in a bush, for example. Like when it just starts, you'll immediately notice it, but if it just keeps on going and it's like, it's just a rabbit, or I don't know, you sort of filter it out because like, I don't need to pay attention to that. But like, so when you take sounds and just make them obscenely loud, like to really pay attention or shift the attention to that. And especially when you do it unnecessarily and over a long period of time, like you create the sort of, tense feeling. It's that's a really cool way, especially in horror. Like it's I feel like it's especially, or at least particularly important to consciously and very deliberately use sound to sort of create like a pace. Like sometimes you might want the player to, okay, here's a safe zone. You're safe for now. So there's not a lot that makes you pay attention to it. And then you might want to sort of bring more of these things in. and other places to sort of you never know what's going to happen. You never know where the monster is going to pop out from. It's sort of like the high pitched violins in like just before a scare. You have like this very subtle but very high pitched violins that just create this tension, just to poke you in sort of like horror movies and such. They'll often use that.
That's another thing that I wanted to bring up. But Ben, you go first, and then I'll ask my question.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that essentially, as an audio engineer, or as like the whole audio landscape is trying to recreate what we do in our minds, because when we are out there listening to stuff, we constantly filter and focus our attention to different stuff. I mean, if we are in a crowd and we talk to each other, we might not notice the glass clinking from the bartender or maybe the door swinging open. But if you have like a microphone and listen to the recording after, you notice a lot of stuff in there, and it's all like the real raw recording, but your mind doesn't work like that. So essentially you have to pay attention to what do I want the player to focus on, and you have to balance that a lot, because as you already said, if you turn up all the stuff that's anxiety inducing, because that's essentially a sensory overload. So yeah, you can really shift the focus of the player just by lowering the volume of some sounds and making other sounds louder, and maybe even play with the contrast. Maybe even have like a dripping sound, but there's no source of water whatsoever everywhere, and the player starts looking for something. They clearly hear like a really loud drip, but there's no water there, and then you can really mess with their minds a bit. So yeah, like giving this the art of filtering the sound to focus the sound is really, it's a really tough jump sometimes.
Yeah. It reminds me also of the in horror games often, where you have this child laughter, and there's no child, and it's kind of like, why is there the laughter of children here? And it creates this uncanny kind of feel.
That's actually a really good segue into what I was going to ask, because I was wondering what you guys think of those motifs. Like, there are certain things that it's a sound that we've been conditioned by media to associate with whatever it is. You know, if you hear, what's that famous scream that gets used over and over again in old movies?
Willem Tell.
Yeah. Like that sort of thing. Or you associate that sound with something. You associate the sound of a violin shrieking with like, but that's not a natural sound. It's not what would really happen. It's just like we're conditioned to it. There's a word that you used earlier, Ben. I think that you said sonic psychology. And like this
psychoacoustics,
psychoacoustic. Whatever the fuck.
No problem.
I actually like my word too. Yeah, I just made up a new word.
I'm totally on board with that. Let me just jump right in. And those motifs, I think it's the same with filmmakers with visuals. You can play with them, you can use them. But I think where it gets really interesting is when you have a chance to, or have the freedom to play with those motifs. So, for example, if you have like the laughing baby motif thing, and you build it into your horror game, and then there's really a baby there, and then everything is fine, and the player is constantly wondering what the fuck is going to happen next, and nothing happens, and then you get him with another scare or something. I think that's, just like in filmmaking with different like styles or visuals that we are used to, you can play with those. But it's also, it might also be just like a Western culture thing, Eastern culture thing, because you have different motifs there. That's the same for sounds as well. Not just with the visuals stuff. In the last couple of years, I was trying to get into more obscure kind of films, and films from Russia and films from China, like not the blockbuster movies, but the old ones, the classics, trying to talk to people and trying to get a picture of what is universal and what is not universal. Because, for example, bullet time is something that is used in a lot of Western media and was also used in China. But then there are other motifs that are just like Western style, and you can make this association if you are used to a lot of Western media. But if you're in the East, you don't get it, and it doesn't really do the same for you. So, I'm trying to find different kind of styles and maybe mix them, and trying to find those specific motifs from other cultures I've maybe never even heard of. So, that's always an interesting hunt for me.
Yeah.
It's really hard to find things that haven't been tainted by Hollywood, right? Like, so you have to find like these very isolated, because you watch this is a Russian film, but like that director, what were the movies he was watching? Typically, it's
I mean the new ones, but I'm talking about going back to the 60s or 70s and going back to
like
the old stuff.
Stellaris and Stalker and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's also. I mean, they influence each other. I mean, there's the American version of Stellaris, and they're going back and forth now, and it's getting a bit mixed together, especially with internet stuff. But if you're thinking about like countries like North Korea, which it's really horrible, but their filming is just straight propaganda stuff, and it's totally different from ours. And watching that and just trying to understand what they are doing is also really interesting. And also, like, I think Indian movies are what's it called, Bollywood style movies, the old ones that try to emulate Hollywood but then went off in a completely different direction are also very interesting, especially the early ones. So yeah, it's not everything is tainted by Hollywood. I think that's just like our perspective. So you can find some really nice and strange French or Spanish movies that are really unique and have their own style. But yeah, you have to dig a bit. That's for sure.
Yeah. What are some examples of, like, it could be a film or a game or whatever that you guys consider to be like, you know, particularly good work, or something that you reference a lot and think about a lot in your own work?
As in that the sound was exceptional, or that in like this is just a game that has meant a lot to me or something?
I mean, we can talk about all that stuff, you know, what means a lot to you too, but I'm specifically right now I'm referring to you know, like this is like my, you know, golden standard for great sound design or something like that. Or even just a sound itself, like just something you noticed. Ben looks like he's gonna like rip his microphone off.
No, I can jump on that if you have to think a bit about it, because when I think about games and sound, the first thing that came to mind almost instantly was Soma, which is like a psychological horror.
It's the
kind of
same
game
team that did Penumbra, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a game that everyone needs to play, especially because it's for me it's just a masterpiece. But they also had like this, like we talked earlier, they had amazing room tones and amazing pressurized feeling of the whole world that was going to just swallow you up. And that is a game that really influenced me a lot, because the first time I played it, I was just blown away from all the experience and the story. But the second time I played it and really tried to analyze a bit what they did with sound, what they did with the writing, and even with like reverb types and stuff like that, and try to get into this. And that's one example I can point out right away. And just because I just saw it yesterday, Dune was like a masterpiece in sound design. I watched it yesterday in the cinema, and I'm going to watch it again, and maybe even a third time, just because of the sound. Because I mean, it was just
right. Now that the story is out of the way, you can pay attention to all the little details.
Exactly. The first time was just blowing me away, and then I watched a special on the audio team, and they got like the freedom to do some research and development before the actual production, so they really had time to go into what the music would sound like, what the sounds would sound like, what they should evoke, what kind of feeling they should evoke. And I mean, the film is like 2.5 hours, and it's slow at times. It's really slow if you like look at it objectively, but it's always intense in the right moments. It always gives you like the feeling of the desert planet is a really harsh environment, even if nothing is happening. It's the brooding low frequency tones and the short stabs of sounds that are really just perfectly pointed. Yeah. If
make sure you take some spice. Make sure you take some spice melange before you go in. That way you can really pay attention. Yeah. What was the South Park joke about spice melange? It's like Tom Brady's shit.
Yeah. Oh yeah, right. Almost forgot that one.
All right, Jonas, you're on the spot. What are some good examples for you? Some good stuff that you reference a lot?
It is a good question. Like at least like three things that like one game that I particularly enjoyed or particularly, I particularly noticed the music in it was like Journey, and how well oftentimes it would just fade into the next part of like the music as you move through the levels. Particularly one that I feel they did insanely right, and I'd like to try and play through it again and again just to figure out when exactly they move about. It's like you have this part where you sort of like slide through the sand down the city. It's really high paced, and this music starts playing, and then you have like at the halfway point you come out from this top and then fall down. Not at the end. There's like sort of this place where you have to do a little like platforming puzzle, and then you get to move on. But it's like the music sort of swells up, and then just as you go out, like the camera will make this shot where you have from the side, whereas you're just shooting out in high speed from this place, and then back into the view of the player as you're falling down. And these strings will just like build up, and it is timed perfectly with when you come out. They swell up and then they just stop and let the reverb fade out, and it's like one of the games where I feel like that music, audio, gameplay, and the cinematography as well just meshes together beautifully to create this like short but very tightly designed experience where art and the creative and technical aspects just works together to create this amazing experience. And like particularly the music there was just I was absolutely blown away the first time I played it. Another game I've been playing recently is Ghost of Tsushima, and the audio work on that game is just absolutely stellar. It's it's like it's like whenever I listen to it, it's so crisp, it's so good. Like when you get on and off the horse, for example, you hear like the leather and everything. It's like they have the movement done right. I don't think they time it to the animation. They just have like the sound of the movement as all the little pieces that you would expect to be there are just there, and you buy the thing. But it's very detailed. It's very crisp. It sounds good, and everything about that game just sounds good. They did an amazing job. I think they also sent their audio team to Japan to get a lot of recordings and a lot of source material. So that and they absolutely, I think, nailed the audio. And a third game. It's like the Kingdom Hearts series in terms of
dude,
audio design. One of the things I got really into, I sort of curveballed into audio design. So I went back to play it some years back, and like I really got into how they it's basically a lot of the audio is sort of like pink noise with some filters on it. They make like these wobbly effects when you defeat a Heartless. You have this sort of it's basically just a filter that they sort of wobble with when you and then they sort of use pitch and the opening and closing of filters to indicate movements. And so I got very into sort of trying to design sounds where it have some source material that was recorded from the real world, but then trying to use design synthesized sounds to sort of add movement, layers of movement in as well. Sort of became a thing I experimented with, I got really hooked on that for a while. It was very fun trying to listen to what they did and trying to recreate some of the sounds. Also because like they, back during that time, they wouldn't have had all the tools or even like the amount of storage on the PlayStation 2 back in the day. They did not have the same luxury as we do today. So it was kind of funny delving into some of these ways they circumvented that and worked with these limitations that I thought was very cool.
It's funny you bring that up. I was talking with a friend earlier about Happy's Humble Burger Farm, and we were like trying to figure out like why is this demo like 20 gigs? And the same problem with Titanfall as well. It's because of the fucking music and the sound is like all like, it's uncompressed wave files, and it's just all of it, like bam, everything, because it meant a lot to whoever was designing it. And I'm sure in John of the Shred's case, it was hugely important to him that the music sound kick ass in that particular game. Magnus, do you have a point of view or anything that stands out to you?
I was actually going to bring up Ghost Tsushima as well.
Damn.
It's a nice Sonic experience. I guess from a game I've recently played, Spider-Man has some fun sound design. For example, when you swing down, it's the newest Spider-Man for PS4. I don't know, but yeah. The feel like the sound of when you swing down and you get real close to the cars on the road, you get this kind of Doppler effect that's really well made, I think. And another recent game, I guess, Subnautica has been fun.
Yeah,
it uses sound heavily to create this feel of like kind of a greater world, and also it relies heavily on sound for its like horror-esque moments where you can suddenly feel like, oh shit, there's something in the deep. So I think they utilize sound in a fun way. And I guess the last example is more of the music and the mood, but Diablo 2. I'm a great fan of Diablo 2. And music from Matt Ullman and the mood of the entire game is really it just does something for me. And I don't even know if I want to say it's like some kind of technical feat. I don't know if they had any like challenges with audio, but the whole mood and vibe of the game that is special, like the sounds and the music brings, is just does something for me. Yeah.
Well, it's one of those interesting things, like how, you can go to school and you can like study and be like this fantastic Tony, for example, Ben, like this, you could be this musician who is like, he knows every in and out of how music works. But every once in a while you get like an Eddie Van Halen or a Jimi Hendrix who just has no proper training whatsoever and comes up with this amazing idea. And so like when you're talking about it, it's like, I don't know if it was this amazing feat or if it's just the magic of what they created, but yeah, like that shit matters.
Exactly.
And, I always reference the guitar because I play, but like, there's the guy who can, play every scale known to man. And then there's the guy who can bend a note, just one note, like B.B. King, like, like just really make it hit your soul. And that's what matters.
Yeah.
The thing you associate with it, or is the thing that makes you feel that you can't really touch.
Right.
Just going back like a couple of minutes to the Spider-Man game, that's something. I think the first one, I don't know if the newest one did it as well. They recorded the voiceover for the Spider-Man character, or for the player character, twice, once running and once walking. So if Spider-Man is talking and you start sprinting, you get like the other voice line where he's out of breath. The first time I realized that, I was like, what the fuck? I mean, it's like the double the work for the small effect that most people probably don't really notice, but that really got me, because that was something that is always irks me when a sound doesn't quite fit. Like, for example, your character is like blasting away and talks to his teammates like in a normal room tone like voice. They obviously can't hear them. Or you're sprinting and he's very calmly talking through his dialogue. That's something that you really don't notice if you don't pay attention to it. But if someone takes the time and extra effort to make it really pop, that can heighten the immersion a lot. And that was a great point with Spider-Man. That was the first time I saw it ever. So it's kind of it's like the thing with audio. It's often that when it goes well, you don't notice it, but if something is off, then it sticks out like a sore thumb. And that was one of the things. Like if you're up on a perch, just looking out over the city, and nothing is happening, then it's like, he's just talking normally. But it especially when you're just swinging around, and it's like, hey, you're late for work, and it's like, I'll be right there, and you sort of, you feel the effort, and everything just fits together. But
because we expect that, we don't really notice. And yeah, it was really. I remember hearing about that, and then I was like, really? And then I checked it out in the game, and I was like, damn, my God, they were thinking about everything there. Or maybe they just had the one voice line, and they just realized late in production, like, we're gonna need you to do it all over again, but like you're out of breath. So
that must have been a very intense recording session.
Yeah.
Mind for the breath, maybe on a treadmill or something. I think the Guardians of the Galaxy game, the newest, does this as well. I think I'm not really sure if it's a technical thing where they change something, but you have like a normal talking voice, then like a shouting talking voice if the character is away from you. So they have a lot of dialogue in that game, and depending on where you stand from your teammates, he's either shouting or talking normally. And yeah, I think they even have 3 different kinds of voice lines. I haven't checked it out if it's like a technical thing, if they just turn up the volume and make some kind of effect on it. But that's also something that seems to catch on, which I really like.
Yeah.
It's also I actually noticed this with Spider-Man as well. The animations too, where it's like if you zip to a point, if you're far away, it's like if you just went like in a straight dive all the way, it would sort of feel weird. Where sometimes he will do the thing where he, does like he rolls around or does some kind of stunt, depending on how far away you are from a point, and also when you land, how much force is going into that. It's like for all these little interactions, I find it very amazing. Like oftentimes how much that if you're not really thinking about it, you're just kind of taking it for granted. But it's like it's one of these things where the technical aspects and the creative aspects just blends together.
Exactly. Reminds me of. Sorry.
No, go on. That's fine.
It's just that it reminds me also of Nier Automata, where they developed a reverb system where it constantly shoots out these raycasts from the player character, and these raycasts hits different objects in your scene. And then it measures how close the points are to the player and what material did they hit. And then it uses all these data to change the reverb so it sounds like accurate to where the player is. If it is like a tight hall, then the reverb would be in one way. If it's a big hallway or something, maybe it's a huge reverb or something. And it's not really like reverb is important, and it sure sells like this spatiality of a place and puts it in a room in a way, but still it is an effect I think a lot of people don't think about at all. They would probably think about it if it's not there, but or at least they would notice something is kind of off. But just like the sheer effort of making such a reverb system for something that most players wouldn't be really thinking of, I think it's really nice. It's just like what Jonas is talking about, where it's like so much effort for what feels like so little can be very...
it's the thing that you notice it when it's missing. And that's kind of like, as we talked earlier about, like when you just remove all sound, then you notice that there's no sound.
Yeah.
It's kind of like one of the things as well when you have like the creative side to when you are designing audio. But that's also like because the implementation, the technical sides and the systems that have to play back that audio. For example, like a classic example is if you have like a laser and you need like this loop to be playing while you're firing a laser, and it's if you make sound for a movie, you just make the damn laser as it's okay, it's playing for about 3 seconds and it stops. But in a game it's like, no, you need to break the sound down into a starting section, a loop, and a release. So like when the player pushes down the button, you don't know how long they're going to be holding that button. So you break it down into pieces, and you also have to think about the sort of implementation and the audio solutions that you're working with. And oftentimes it's like, when we're working with things, like sometimes it's like, okay, are there some tools that we already have that would allow us to do a certain thing, for example, or do we have to develop a specific system to do this particular thing that we're trying to do? And it might be like a custom event that's happening, and it's sort of like more elaborate. And then you're like, okay, we need to talk to the coders because we need to access certain things. And it's like one of the first things I remember being told was more like, we don't like we wanted to, of course, do good work, but it's like, if you're thinking about some elaborate system, like say the reverb system for Nier Automata, for example, it's like we don't need anything fancy, but like my immediate response was the sort of, that's not up to me. That depends on what you're doing. Like if you just having a vehicle, like a car, making the audio for vehicles is like notoriously hard. It's like we don't decide how fancy this is. We just need the systems to be there to allow us to make this sound like you would expect. And so there's both the technical aspect, sort of like production and post-production of a sound, and then you have implementation, which is like particularly, well, depending on the sound, right, and what you actually need. Like one shots, you can basically just, when this happens, play this one shot sound. But again, like with the laser or with vehicles, for example, it's like, okay, we need some systems that can do a lot of things, can check for like, is let's say, how fast is the car running? Are you braking? And then if you want like the sound of like when it's drifting, for example, you want the sound of the tires. If you're suddenly in the air, you have to track how far we are, how fast are we coming down. They're all, and like the physics as well. When the car hits the ground, it's like, okay, we need the sound of like the chassis and the wheels hitting the ground and the engine going like, and the car stabilizing again, and like all these things that you have to take into consideration. And that's where, you're sitting there as but I'm a sound designer. I really need some help from the coders. So
that's why I like the Dukes of Hazzard, because they just destroyed the car and that was all they needed to do.
Yeah, but then you have stuff like your tires blowing out. So, okay, you're running on the metal sound. So the rear left wheel has to sound like metal. And if the system can't do it, you have to make some kind of bogus sound that sounds a bit like it, depending on, you can't really pinpoint it to the wheel. Then you have like one tire's blown out, play this sound. Yeah, you can get away with a lot of stuff, but as you said, you notice it when it's not there. And if you get to a certain point, it always sounds good to most people. But when you add on to that, then people will also say it just sounds good, but it will feel better. And people that really drive this point home is like the Star Citizen sound guys. I don't know if you have seen any behind-the-scenes sound effect stuff from those guys, but they are really setting up systems because they have these intricate engines with the whole physics in there. With a spaceship behaves differently on the ground and in the atmosphere and in the lower atmosphere and the higher atmosphere in the space. So they have thousands of points of data, and basically the audio team was like, nice, we can use all these kind of data points to change our sounds. And they have a really intricate system of where they sometimes just have one sound that is used in 1,000 different ways, depending on the air drag and the speed and the atmosphere and the weather effects. And you can use EQs and you can use like pitch shifting and you can use even more intricate kind of stutter effects or something else. And they really took this to an amazing level. And always when I watch those videos, I'm not really jealous of that kind of job, because that's like, I mean, you have to make 1,000 sounds or something for like a vehicle, and then they all have to fit all these different criteria. They have to sound good in every iteration, in every kind of damage type of the ship, in every kind of atmosphere and weather, and you have to test it like probably for hours. That's a really crazy example. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have these like competitive games like Blizzard did with what was the shooter called, Overwatch.
Yeah.
They did this threat-based audio system, which I really love. There's a talk on that. I probably guessed that you guys saw there's that as well. But for people that didn't see it, the basic gist was, if someone is right behind you, but it's a teammate, you don't really hear that sound loud. And if someone is shooting right in front of you with a really weak weapon, but like 10 meters away, someone is loading up a rocket launcher, that sound gets amplified because it's more dangerous. And then you have the whole point of making different footsteps for different types of enemies. So if you're really good at the game, you can hear from the sound who's coming from around that corner. Is that a class that's really dangerous to me or not? Should I switch weapons or not? And yeah, that was really a masterclass in sound design for like utility, I would say. Not realism at all, but for competitiveness.
Yeah. That's it's kind of like the same thing with like we mentioned before, like bringing in sounds to a sort of like a natural level, because like you're sort of like the finest function of a sound designer is to make sure, you know, you make like this audio, we have like these hierarchies, like which sounds are the most important, and so you know which sound should duck others. For example, you know, as you said, like in Overwatch, it's like you hear the footsteps like unnaturally loud, and so you know, oh, there's an enemy approaching me. Like if they're naturally loud, it's like you're supposed to notice them, and that's also again using that sort of you know these psychoacoustics as well in this beautiful way to in a more sort of like this
Sonic
utility
psychology.
gameplay approach. But
it's the Spidey sense. It's like you're game. You really have it. You can listen through walls. You can hear footsteps, even if someone is like firing a minigun right on your right ear. It's a teammate, so you hear the footsteps louder, which is totally unrealistic and wouldn't happen at all. But it's very important for the gameplay, and it drives the point home, and it makes it an excellent game and an excellent experience.
Yeah.
And that's the kind of decisions you have to make. Yeah.
It's also interesting because it's kind of at a point where the feedback information of the sound is more important than again the realism of it. So it's more important for the player to hear enemy footsteps, even though it doesn't make sense in real life. It's kind of really interesting also how you can constantly give players the right feedback so they can instantly respond to something.
Yeah, and another... Oh, sorry, go on.
No, you first.
Okay, like another very interesting, well, not interesting, I guess, it's a very classic way of also using that is sort of like when you have dialogue. Say you have like a battlefield and there's like bombs falling and you know, planes just flying overhead and there's like guns and screams and everything, but it's like as soon as the dialogue starts playing, it's like music, everything will calm down so you can actually hear what, you know, your orders and what you're being told, even though normally, you know, you'll be like screaming at each other's faces, you wouldn't be able to hear anything, and you'd be like, what? But no, like we just turn the volume down. It's like bombs outside, it's not, don't worry about it.
Great
if
example.
You're really good, you can mix it just the right way that it still sounds like the person is screaming at you.
Yeah,
you would, but it's loud enough that you can understand it, and finding that right spot. Sometimes I really take a lot of time on balancing that kind of stuff to make it not as absurd as it would be when someone is talking next to you and it's a really loud voice, a really low volume voiceover that can make it really comically and make it really shitty. So finding that right spot where it's just not too annoying and just feels right. It's
It like if you don't, it can sort of get cartoony in a sense when you want a more serious moment. So sometimes you want to be really subtle with it. I am definitely more of a fan of that approach to like having this sort of side chaining effect where the dialogue signal just slightly pushes down all the other signals in the hierarchy.
Yeah, absolutely. That's absolutely necessary. But like fine tuning that kind of sign chaining that can take some time sometimes.
That's one of those things. Like the classic is the nightclub, right? Like you're in a nightclub, and like whoever designed the sound, for this nightclub has obviously never been in a nightclub before, because you're just screaming at each other. Like my favorite thing to do is like when I went out to a country bar recently, and I'm just like the music's blaring, and then my friend's trying to talk to me. He's like, I don't understand a fucking word you're saying, kind of thing. But in a movie or a film or in a game or whatever the fuck, you always have the option to just play with, augment reality a little bit for convenience. And that's a part of it too, because as you said at the very beginning of this conversation, it's not always about what's realistic. It's about telling the story effectively and what feels right to the person viewing it or hearing it. Anime does this all the time, like tremendously, where they're just like, there's a Super Saiyan fight going on or whatever, and then they're just like, all the sound is gone, ominous noise, and the two characters are just talking to each other. But that's what makes anime so special, is the fact that they can do that, and it's not weird. It's just like, this is our way of telling the story and moving the plot along.
Disregard reality and go from there, and that's it.
You will not defeat me until I have had this monologue. To be continued.
Yes, that's like the classic like Dragon Ball Z episode is like the 5 or 6 filler episodes between the cliffhanger and the fight, of they're just like telling each other like, you don't understand how bad I'm about to whip that ass. And they're like, no, I'm telling you, I'm gonna beat the shit out of you, dude. I'm gonna throw you into the sun, and then to be continued, and then they do it again for like 4 more episodes. It's like the Xbox.
Really is like One Punch Man really is like for me it's like the highlight of the whole anime kind of thing, because it already took like a really weird and out of reality kind of style and made it even more absurd. And I enjoyed that a lot. That was like a highlight. And they also made a lot of interesting sound choices in there.
So can I bring up a game that I like and have you guys poke fun at its sound design, or at least like tell me why
it's
I think about a great idea?
It's total shit.
Shoot.
That's okay, because what I'm going to say is Quake, especially Quake 2, and then derivative of the Quake 2 engine is Warfork, obviously the Q-Fusion engine. The sound design in these games is like it's not realistic. It's not based in reality at all. It's all about, like what makes a great esport. You brought up Overwatch earlier, and they do a lot of work to do this, but like getting all the way back to ground zero here.
Yeah.
One of the things that's really special about the Quake 2 engine is that, like, if you're playing 1v1, right, you and me, whoever you are, if you make a noise at all, I can hear it. As long as I've turned the music off, which every arena FPS player knows, you turn the music off, right? And I'm listening for your footsteps, or I'm listening for you to make that grunt sound. And this is something that professional Quake players do all the fucking time. Like, they're really smart about it, and it's a huge part of the game. Is like, if you hear that grunt sound, that they just either skipped a step somewhere or they fell off of something. And so like, if you're on like DM6 or, a map like that, I'm sorry if I'm talking about, Quake shit that you guys don't care about, but ideally, where someone, you last saw them here, you hear a noise, now you have new information. And it's so cool. In general in Quake, I'm probably one of the most notorious amongst my friend group about, I will play the game 100% silent until I'm trying to kill you. Like, I'm very meticulous about, like, I know how to go down the steps just the right way. I know how to, like, not fall off of shit. And I know how to just, like, walk. Because you will not know I'm coming until I am ready to kill you, until I have full on item control. And
it's very, I haven't played enough of Quake to really give a truly informed opinion, but it's very much the kind of thing where, because audio holds a lot of information, like jumping, walking, running, all of these things, like, what the other player is doing just from paying attention to the sound. And again, it taps into that thing where like the finest function of the audio is to convey gameplay relevant information. and yeah, as long as you sort of do that, and also of course dress a sound up. Like for example, pickups is a great example of sounds that where you associate like health pickups or armor pickups or ammo pickups. Like from the sound, you differentiate and hear and know what you picked up, even if you weren't really looking. You were just walking into it. Like, oh, cool. Like I that was a health.
It happened to me in a duel very recently, where like I'm in campgrounds, right? The Quake 3 map. You're walking across the bridge where the you go from rocket launcher, and there's a bridge that overlooks where the red armor is, the main armor of the game. And you walk out there, and everybody knows this. If you hear the other guy, because he's timing it in his head, right? He knows 30 seconds or whatever the fuck. He picks up that armor, and you hear, oh, he got it, and you just back up. You don't engage, or you do, depending on how stacked you are. But you get what I'm saying. Like that's truly valuable information, and in PvP games, it's extremely important to get it just right and to get the audio levels just right.
Yeah. It's nothing worse like counting slightly wrong, and you walk over like the spot where the rocket launcher is supposed to spawn or the armor is supposed to spawn, and that sound isn't coming, and you're like, fuck, totally out of your rhythm. Yeah, that's. I played a lot of Quake 3 as well, but not to that level that I turned off the music. Actually, I listened to thrash metal or death metal while playing it, and I just enjoyed the speed and the sheer like chaos of it. So not really competitively, just like friendly, but yeah, that kind of, especially the item pickups or like hitting an armor and hearing if you hit the other player, oh, that he has an armor on or something like that. That's a really important part of the competitive gameplay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Go ahead.
I was wondering, Ty, have you played, because my brother, he keeps going on about, and I have played it a bit, there's the game called Hunt Showdown.
No,
do you know that?
But my friend Jahar plays that game a lot.
Jahar, yeah. Like one of the cool things they have done in that game is that they use audio a lot. Like you have, for example, if you have like some birds sitting around somewhere, and you just move into them, they will make a sound, they will fly in a direction, and people will know, because you're all trying to get to this. There's like a monster that you will all try to hunt and kill, and you will try to get the bounty, and then get to like get out of the map, basically, to sort of like an escape point. But like one of the things is they use audio in all these ways, where if you run, you're louder. You can sneak to be, of course, they can still hear you if they stop up, but and if you move through water as well, it's like you become very aware about every little sound in that game and what it's making and what it's telling the other players about your position, where you are, and if you're trying to sneak up on them. And it kind of reminded me of that when you talked about Quake, and that's it's actually a really cool game that I have been meaning to actually buy and play with my brother, because he's been bugging me about that for a long time.
Well, I'll have to get together after this and play.
Yeah.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, absolutely. I was looking forward to taking some time for this as well, because I noticed in the gameplay videos that especially like you talked about, you have like the different water sounds, you have like the different environmental sounds, where if you get used to the game and the sonic landscape, you can, just like you said in Quake, you can listen to the sounds and hear where the players are. Maybe they're surrounding you. Maybe they are planning something you already know in your head. How to react to that? That's it's amazing.
That's something that Warfork and Quake 1 share. It's like one of those things that just made it all the way through, and other games too, because everything's based on the Quake engine for some reason. Because John Carmack is a genius. But
yeah,
there is no footstep sounds. Like, they don't exist, unless you're moving really fast. So it's kind of generally assumed in a game like Quake or Warfork that you're strafe jumping all the time, and the sound of you moving is hup, 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 or whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
And so people will play it, like that, with the assumption of like, I'm just going to move lightning fast and they won't ever know where I'm at. And one of the genius strategies, or at least my genius strategy, is like, I'm just not going to do that. I'm just going to be super fucking quiet and make you guess all the time. Is he going to come around that corner or not? And in reality, I'm off on the different side of the map. I'm picking up all the items, and I'm going to come get you. But things like you said earlier, like sometimes the lack of sound is just as important as the presence of sound. And I mean, Thelonious Monk famously was the guy who said, like, the notes that you don't play are just as important as the notes that you do play. And
Yeah.
are there instances like that where you have ever like just decided like we're going to omit something that seems obvious because it plays into the mechanic of what I'm trying to create or the game that I'm trying to, sell to people? Ben is always like, I have an answer, but I'm trying to be polite. Like,
No, really, I don't really have an answer as well. But
yeah,
it's
weird,
a very
right?
good question.
Or like in Sir Ragnar, when we had this huge argument about whether or not there were going to be footstep sounds.
Yeah. As soon as you said Sir Ragnar, I instantly knew that you meant footsteps when we.
Yeah.
The first time that Damien mentioned like he doesn't want footsteps in there, I was like, yeah, fine, sure. I mean, it's nice because you have like the music is in the forefront because Tony's music is just amazing, and I'm just trying with my sound design to make it like just enhance the world a bit, but let the music take the forefront because I think that's really important, especially for that kind of game where you are slowly reading a lot and taking in the environment. But after we decided to go with the footsteps, just like we said before, no, you never knew it when it was missing, but now you know it when you have it. It's really important for grounding the player, and there's I was thinking about if I knew another game except for like the Quake games where you don't have footsteps, but I guess there aren't that many games, right? I mean, it was a conscious decision probably because of the tactical aspect of it, but yeah, I can't really think of another game that does that, and off the top of my head, I can't really think of an example where I did something like that as well.
We have like I probably can't say too much that will reveal exactly what this is, but we have actually worked on something where we have used the lack of sound to we have like an area we designed where we had to, and Magnus, feel free to stop me if you feel like I'm going overboard here. But we have like it was designed with this enemy that is going to be there in mind, that we sort of wanted to bring in to as part of like the environment. And the thing is that we made it so that this enemy you can hear. We have like different sounds that you can hear from different distances. So you can sort of hear like one layer coming in as the enemy is closing in. Then we put another layer that as the enemy is getting closer. And like the feeling that we were trying to convey here was like, in the first place, we wanted this area to be abstract, but we also wanted there to be space for you to sort of be able to hear, spatialized as well, because the enemy will be moving around like, oh shit, he's over there now, for example, right? And it's like, okay, I'm going to move in this direction, and it can like sneak up on you, and everything already sounds sort of abstract and weird, and then you have like these extra layers coming in, where the absence of it, you still feeling creepy, and when it suddenly comes in, it's like what we said. It creates this sort of push-pull effect during that whole section. So yeah, that's probably one where we've used this thing where the sudden absence of sound and the sudden appearance of it will be able to throw you off.
Yeah, that's a really nice idea, man.
Also, for the record, Magnus didn't stop me, so if I went overboard, it's all his fault.
I think you're good, man. I'm
yeah,
paying attention. I got the inside scoop too, so I'm just trying to like.
Yeah,
all right, let's see what happens. You got to be careful with those NDA stuff. No, you did.
I feel like back in school, I'm the only one out.
I know everything that we're doing, and I'm not quite sure which project you're talking about. So I think we're safe.
No, it's totally fine, man. It's totally fine. No, but I think that's a really good way of making something special. But you have to really think about what you want to do. On Skywind, we have a plan, or we had a plan for a certain type of enemy that is more like in the Lovecraftian kind of area where we want to play with psychoacoustics, and there's
Sonic
always
psychology.
Sonic psychology. Yeah, sorry,
I'm just fucking
I always get it wrong. But there's always a lot of there's a room for making some kind of making just muting player sounds or something that you suddenly don't hear your footsteps anymore. You suddenly don't hear the reverb of the room or something like that, where you can really go nuts with it. But yeah, I don't think, if I think back, that I had yet the chance to make something like that, because it has to really fit, because you can't go too overboard or you make it comically. You have to really pick your certain spots to use stuff like that to not make it too weird, unfortunately. Hopefully one day I can work on a game that's just weird from front to back, just make it really, really strange.
Yeah. So I want to talk about, like, I'm a producer, you guys are all sound designers, and like the perspective of when you really feel passionate about something, like, making it known and trying to talk people into good ideas that you have. A prime example would what we brought up earlier with Damian not wanting to put footstep sounds in Call of Ragnar, because for him it was a very logical decision. He's like, well, we can't have the footsteps of, we have a party here. We have like 4 people walking together, and it doesn't make sense to have 4 footstep sounds because you're playing the game from the perspective of like, a first person thing, while acting as a party. And despite that, and though I totally understood his logic, every person that I had, because, when you guys initially came on the podcast, and before I was even involved in the project, Damian gave me the key and I tested out the game, obviously. And then I ran my thoughts by Dave Oshry, who had also played it and had a lot. We both like had a list of notes that we made about it. And both of us agreed, why are there no footsteps? It feels unnatural. And every single person that I've asked, other than Damian, felt the same way. Like, it's just weird that there's no footstep sounds. There's no jumping, like there's nothing. There's no player feedback in terms of 90% of what you do in the game is walk or read.
Yeah.
And so that was like a big thing that I pushed back with him on. I'm like, listen, I know you feel the way you do, but hear me out. It'll just feel better for the player if you give in and let Ben make some damn footstep sounds. And then you went nuts and you knocked it out of the park, obviously, like with all you have the wet footstep sounds and the gravel and the sand and the mud and, but I say all that to say this, like, how do you guys go about making your ideas and your assertions known to the people who you're working with, whether they be the director or the producer or just, the other guy?
Bribes, definitely. I have like a bribe fund. Just like usually we like to I feel like oftentimes, and of course, Magnus, you can have some input as well if you have other things but it's like I feel like a lot of the times we sort of tie it into gameplay moments and how you might enhance or communicate better to the player stuff that's happening, and again, like if there's something that just sounds unnatural, where you're like, actually, this would just be a lot of auditive noise that we don't really need. We always come in from like a position of, sort of serving the gameplay and serving what we're actually trying to do, like either a mood or a gameplay moment or something where it's like, this will take away from this mood you're trying to set here, or this thing here will really help, get the sort of communicate the gameplay properly. And so we always try to I guess, the point being approaching it from sort of this game design language that they can understand, and then give sort of the professional opinion, but also oftentimes come up with like a solution as to like if this might not be so good. However, this either removing this allows us to do a lot more with this other thing where we can really make this stand out and be really cool and nice. or we maybe not do this, but we can do this instead. That is sort of in the vein of what you want. So we always try to sort of, what would you say, not just come up with like a no, let's not do that, but more, or let's do this, but like okay, show that we have at least our understanding of like the gameplay and like game design, and also having studied like game audio and delve into these things, like what would be good alternatives, or like we get what you're trying to do, but actually this would be a better way of doing it. I feel oftentimes that gets us very good results, and yeah, like people take that seriously usually when you're not just like knocking an idea that they have. I guess it can feel like that, depending on what it is. So instead of them having to swallow their pride, it's more like you're sort of trying to aid them and speak in a language where they feel like that's what you're trying to do, and you're trying to accomplish sort of like the same thing.
Yeah. There's a mastery to that conversation too. It's not just a matter of like, hey, I think you're wrong and you should change it, because usually people don't respond well to that. It's like hey, what about this? Just consider
also
what I'm saying here.
Maybe you're wrong also. I mean,
it's
not like if you're so sure about yourself, then maybe you might also be wrong and just really stubborn. But I like that approach, and I can just like say almost the same. Like show don't tell is always a good idea, even in sound. For example, if you like want something really maybe complex for integration work, the good thing is you can just like record a gameplay footage video and just make it like a movie type synchronization of it. Like, hey, here is how it would sound with this kind of reverb and with this kind of positioning that would really add to the game. Just look at it and listen to it. And then you can, with like very little amount of work, show what might be possible with like a week or two of programming. And then we can almost, maybe collectively decide, is that a good idea? Is it a good idea to spend that much time on it? It would add to the game, or it wouldn't add to the game. But that's sometimes oftentimes I try to see the point that maybe I'm also wrong. Let's just explore it and listen to what as Jonas said, what is the core thing that we want to achieve here, and maybe try the approach that I think is wrong, and my approach, go in some different directions, try something, just like a proof of concept, nothing polished, just knock it out, and then collectively talk through the options. That's always the best approach, I think.
That's something that you and I run into a lot, Ben, is that like, and honestly, Chris is the biggest, we'll say perpetrator, right, on the Stellar Valkyrie team, is that he's a voice actor. He's very self-conscious. Obviously, he knows he's the forefront, the face of the game. Essentially, he is the voice of the game, and he will be so like, he comes to my house and we'll just sit down and talk, and he's like, I need you to let me know if you guys like don't like something, like if I need to do another take. And I feel the same way about you. You'll do that too. We're like, well, what do you guys think of this? And like, we all just think you're great. Like, we all just think you're tremendous, and just do what you do. And we'll let you know, if you ever fuck up, we'll let you know. But otherwise, like, we all like it. And it's, from a producer standpoint, it's like, I really try to always just, you're the expert. You're the sound designer. You know what the fuck you're doing. Unless I feel strongly about something, my job should be to do nothing, hopefully, or rein you in if you get out of hand. That's it.
Yeah.
And
I think, as Ben also stated, like definitely having that you might be wrong. I feel like the best, like the approach will usually take this sort of like having like a dialogue, like speaking on pure like audio terms, like this might miscommunicate things, but also try to again get them to talking, like what are they trying to do exactly? Because the more precise they can be about what it is that they want, the better we can sort of say, okay, maybe we have like 3 ways of doing this thing. And it's like, okay, so we could do this or this or this. You could try that out. Does that work for you? And sort of, or maybe we mentioned something that we could do, and they're like, oh, perhaps if we can do this, perhaps we could design this like they'll get another idea, and you sort of get their input again, and because you don't want to remove them from the decision entirely, especially in sort of like game designing and gameplay terms. Like you want to get them to give input. You're more like making suggestions, not demands, while
Correct.
still sort of also kind of consulting in a sense about what would you say? What would be considered? Like again, if you have a situation where you already know that, okay, if we start doing this where all of these little things will each have a sound, then if you have like a group of let's say enemies, and they're like, oh, we'll just put some footstep sounds on each, and it's like, one, that won't sound natural. Two, one of the things that people will often do, like a trick as well, is, let's say you have 5 enemies approximately close together. Then what will often be done is that they will have the system where they check like what are like the 3 closest enemies mayhap, and then they say, oh, only these 3 enemies will actually play footstep sounds, so you don't get this cacophony of sounds from all around you. You get like the sounds that are important to you gameplay wise and what you actually want to know. And that's like one of the things where you can be like, you go in and you say, oh, actually we don't just willy-nilly want to just put like footstep sounds on everyone when this particular case comes up. Like we want to be careful. If we have situations where there will be like a group of enemies and a lot of them, we want to set things up this way. So it all depends on like, if you have like just some enemies spread out, then of course it's like, in this situation we won't need it. But if they have like a horde of zombies or something that's all coming together, it's like, oh, how about perhaps we can make like just this one audio cue, just using this one voice, but having be like at the front of this horde of enemies that's just charging at you, so that it's more performant. We say voices, and we can make like the sound of a group of enemies instead of making individual sounds that won't sound like a group of enemies. It's like you have the idea of it's Walter Murch's The Rule of 2.5, where it's like in a movie and also in games, if you have like one person walking in like a shot, you want to sort of synchronize the sound of the footsteps to that guy. If you have 2 people walking, you want to do the same thing. But as soon as you have 3 or more, you just want like the sound of footsteps. You don't want to synchronize them all because it's going to sound weird, and the brain will sort of fill in the rest for you. And that's sort of like the idea. Like if you have just a horde of enemies and they're always going to be clumped together, let's just make that one audio cue that's just like a sound of this group of enemies that are just closely lumped together with a whole lot of like footsteps. We don't need to time them. We don't need to check each time an enemy actually takes a step, like calculate the material, what sound needs to be played and all that. We can just make like this one sound that's just there on them when they move, for example.
Yeah,
My mind
the
is
group
blown.
sound effects. Yeah, that ties in the whole silence is important area, and like it's just like you have like a limited space visually, you always also have a limited space in audio, because you can't just play everything at once, and you have to pick your stuff, and you have to let the mind fill in the blanks, as you just said. And but going back to like how to communicate with designers or maybe decision makers, what I found, I don't know what your experience is, but my experience is I found it really hard to have a common language about sound, because visually, I think if you go to YouTube, you have lots and tons of tutorials on how to shade stuff, how to make shadows, how to make outlines, all those words like outlines, shadows, details. That's everyone knows about that. But if I talk to people and say, do you want it to sound warmer, or do you want me to make it shiny, or do you want me to make it whatever word I use to describe some different kind of sound effect? If I say crystallize, do you know what I mean? Probably not, because is there like a common dictionary? No, not really, right?
It's fun to notice that almost all the descriptions for sounds are from other senses.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
something is hot, something is shiny, which is the visual sense.
Yeah.
It's never just like audio sense, which is the fun thing about. But also makes it really, really hard to communicate about sound.
Can I?
Yeah.
Yeah, go.
I've been raising my hand for a while now. That is one of the most annoying things in design of any kind in general. Like, and even worse because I'm slightly colorblind. So like even something like make it bluer. I'm like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. But like, what's the everybody every time there's a game with a shotgun, we're like, you shoot it and like, I don't know, it should sound beefier. You know what I mean? Beefier. Like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah.
That it's so difficult to find a common language to describe any sense other than sight, for anyone.
Yeah.
Like I want it to smell more like onions, or I want this gun to sound, and you as the sound designer are just left to like, I don't know what the fuck they want. The only thing they can do is use synonyms and metaphors or something like, it's like this. I want it to sound like
like this.
that. Yeah. And if you don't have someone who knows what they want, like for instance, visual design, right? Like if someone's a graphic designer, the smart thing to do is come at them with like a few different choices and say like, which one of these works for you? Like a focus group. So which one of these is the path that you want to go? And you kind of gate the customer into what they want because they don't know what they want, or maybe they do, but they can't make you understand it. It's like if someone comes to a restaurant and they're like, well, I want like this. And like, what is this? What do you want? Steak? Do you want chicken? I just, we've all had a girlfriend like that at some point. She's like, I don't know what I want for dinner tonight. And you're just like, well, do you want chicken? You want beef?
I want meat.
Vegetarian? Yeah. Like, what do you want?
It's like saying I want meat, and it's like there's so many things this could be.
Yeah.
No,
but the thing is especially with sounds, I find it really hard. Even if I get to the point where, that's what I want, you have that single sound and you don't have it in the context, you don't have it in the reverb, you have it like, if you have like a really amazing sound for a shotgun, but shotgun is the second weapon you get, how much better can like the eighth weapon or the final weapon sound?
Yeah.
You have it all, you have to put it into context, you have to put it in the context of the other sounds. That's very important.
If the starting pistol sounds like a fucking cannon, then what does the cannon sound like? You know what I mean? Like, what does the BFG sound like?
Yeah. And the other thing is, I think that we didn't really develop a language yet for sound design, because sound design is not really that old. If you think about it, music, the people made music and made sheet music so many years ago when there was no film and there was no sound design at all. And like the first like audio book kind of stuff was very, very late in our existence.
I'm so glad you brought up audiobooks, because that's a huge... I've done that before. Like In the Keep podcast has put on an audio reading of like Lovecraft before. And I realized, like, as I was doing the read for it, I'm like, I need audio cues. And so I got Immorpher to do it. But like that is such a huge part of it. It's not... There's no one medium that this applies to. We're all, in the game industry, but like film, TV, audio books or whatever, even music calls for, some sort of sound design. It really is sound design. It's just musical. And it's so complex. It's such a complex subject that, as you said, has only been around for, it's 2020 now. And so this has been around for maybe 100 years tops.
Yeah, maybe. And classical music is or music in general, or like even like the oral tradition of teaching someone a song is harking back so many years. And for filmmaking, you can say, but filmmaking is rather new. But you had painting. So you know about light, you know about shadows, you know about perspective. That's all, like, there's a whole language associated to it, and most of the people know at least the basics. But if I talk to you about warm or cold sounds, the first time I talked to someone that never had like any experience with sound design, he's like, I don't know what sounds warm and what sounds cold. And then you have to give him some examples, and then he's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. But it feels like learning a new language, and as I already mentioned, I started very late in my life to learn that, and that was the first thing that was really annoying to me. There's not really a reference. There's not really a dictionary. I can't just pick up Sound Design 101 and get the basics. It's just like a lot of it is learning by ear and talking to other people.
Cold is like high treble, weird mid frequency, and very little bass. Warm is like where the bass meets all of the other aspects of the sound in general. In my mind, like, and not talking from a guitar tone point of view, but like you want a nice warm guitar sound, you need like a balanced mid and enough bass to just complement the treble. But if you want to make it really cold, like a death metal, guitar sound,
harsh,
you want that like screaming treble, and like you basically take the mid frequency and you do what we call a mid scoop, where it's like you basically turn the mid off, and if not off, then very low, so that it's got that crunchy, like sudden sound to it. And it's such a difficult language to speak in, unless you're a music producer, right? Unless you're a guy who's fucked around with like knobs for 100 years or something like that.
Yeah, but there you have it. You always have like the connection back to music, because warm and the whole thing, or the disco smile is also like an EQ setting where you have like the low end is pushed, the mids are like lowered, and the high end is pushed. That's what's the like disco smile EQing. Yeah, and that's all like harking back to music again. But we don't have really like, I don't know if there's any word or expression or concept. Any word or expression for like just sound design stuff. I always try to connect it with like, it sounds harsh, it hurts in the ears, then it's probably more high end. And if it's like, if you can feel it, it's more low end. But you always have to try to describe it. So I try to make examples as soon as possible just to get in the ballpark. So like, here are two totally different examples. Where do you want to go? And then we try to associate words to it and try to find a common language. But I feel it's with every like new project, it's almost starting at like 10% again, because so many things aren't really, I don't know. I don't have the language for it. I sometimes have a sound where I'm like, I love that sound. What's it called? I don't know. It's like, and then I just invent some word like crystallize, and then I use that and hope it catches on.
I have another supporter question that I think is very analogous to what we're talking about right now, and I'd actually like to start with Magnus. Hopefully, I think you would have the proper answer for it based on conversations that you and I have had before. Yep. But how do you balance sound effects in terms of music? This comes from Immorpher, and it seems that there is a war in the mid-frequency range where the music dominates. So a lot of modern sound effects seem like they cut out the mid-frequencies, but to me they sound very empty when that happens, especially compared to sound effects that we hear in the past, like older games and films.
That's a big question. I could imagine that first of all, like music in games has also like progressed a lot from old chiptune kind of stuff to full orchestras who fill out the full range of the audio spectrum. But when you put all these sounds together, I think a lot of games, they of course instantly notice that if you just play all these sounds together, it's gonna sound like shit. Mm-hmm. So they use like these complicated hierarchies to say, okay, these sounds lowers ambience and music and blah 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 blah. And these kind of hierarchies are of course different from game to game. For example, like a game like Doom, the 2016 version, they had like an internal talk about like what kind of sounds are the most important one. And I think they found out that the guns is kind of the voice of the Doom guy. So, because normally dialogue is the most important kind of sound in these hierarchies, it's often the one that if somebody's talking, you want to hear what they're saying. Of course not like ambient dialogue. It doesn't really matter that much. But if you're getting like a mission brief or something, you want to be able to hear what they're saying. So these kind of important hierarchies can help clear the mix, especially when a lot of these sounds are in the same frequencies. And yeah, like touching on the effect that your patron is talking about, like this feeling of an empty sound. I can't really bring you an example of myself of a game where I noticed that I felt like the kind of sidechain, I guess he's talking about, kind of effect would be creating this effect of it being hollow. Was that the word?
Mm-hmm. Well, his word that he actually used was empty, but yeah, hollow
empty
applies.
Yeah. Maybe I don't know if he's played some kind of game where they use the sidechain hierarchies in maybe too heavy-handed, because they can become noticeable also. If I think also Ben, you talked about it earlier, where you I think you mentioned like the balance between you wanted to what was the example now again? I think it was in a war where you want these people to yell at each other, where you still want the effect of it's loud, but at the same point you also want to turn down some of the sounds so that you can hear the dialogue being screamed. But yeah, I can't really say that I've noticed any games myself where I think like the sound mix became empty or hollow at some point. But I guess I would say it's probably like too heavy-handed sidechain or something, maybe.
Let's say that I know him more first, so I think his gold standard, like we talked about that a bit earlier, just like what your idea of great design is. For him, it's like Doom 64, like a game like that where Aubrey Hodges' soundtrack and the sound effects for a Doom game are very in sync, right? So in that game, like, and I feel this even, having played the remasters and everything, like I feel like very little has been changed because it very perfectly works. Like the music and the game are in the sound to the game, they don't really hurt each other. Whereas a lot of the time when you play a lot of modern games, the first thing you do is you pop open the sound panel and you adjust the volume to what you want. But it's like it's no longer like master volume and then just straight up sound effects and music. Oftentimes you'll have like dialogue implemented into that. You'll have a lot of different ideas of like how the player themselves can adjust it.
Yeah.
And that may be based on personal experience. So I think maybe from his perspective, it's like, this used to be pretty damn cut and dry. And now we have to allow people to like change their mind or adjust their user experience, based on what they can pay attention to.
Yeah.
And that's what I just said is another subject that I meant to cover with you guys. But for now,
it reminds me actually quickly of there was a teacher at the sound designer education that both Jonas and I went to, who really disliked the option for players to turn down sounds, because he was of the mindset that this sounds like that you get straight out the box is kind of the curated experience from the sound designer. And it's kind of the this is how it should sound. Is kind of what the game is saying, like straight out the box. And then players can adjust. Maybe they want to turn down the music completely so they can play their own music, or maybe they want to just adjust it for their personal listening device. But I remember it stuck with me that he really disliked that option actually, because he disliked the idea that the curated experience from the sound designers would be meddled with when players would adjust these sliders. Has also always been like a fun thought for me. Then he would get so upset. Not upset, but he found
You
them
spend
annoying.
so much time mixing it, and then
Yeah, exactly. Then some
just
jerk comes in and
ruin
is
the
like,
mix, right?
fuck your shit. I want to hear the gunshots more or something.
Yeah, but I mean, I'm I'm totally with you or with him on that. But the other problem is like in the time of Doom 64 or the first Doom or the first Quake games, if you had a PC setup, you basically had a 2.0 or 2.1 sound system, and that was it. Maybe headphones, but nobody really mixed for headphones. Nowadays, you have in good games you have the option of switching between speakers or headphones.
Yeah.
Especially if you're playing with binaural stuff, which
Yeah.
is amazing, but only works on headphones. And then
Yes.
but think about setups people have today. The different kind of sound bars, the different kind of if you're in a living room with a 5.1 system or a stereo setup, or you have a sound bar, if the room sounds really shitty or it doesn't sound really shitty, that I really appreciate the option of
Yeah.
changing it. Because if I'm sitting in my living room and I can't hear the dialogue and I don't have a slider to adjust that, I'm getting pissed. It might sound amazing if I play it in my studio, but I want to sit on my couch and play it.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Just to quickly say, I don't necessarily agree with his opinion either. I think it's nice to give. I really trust that players will make the experience as enjoyable for themselves as possible. So giving them these options is it's really hard to for me to see it as a bad thing, because I think players will always find a way. Like either they don't care and they just play it straight out the gate, and then it's the curated experience. And others, if they want to turn down the music or adjust something, then why not? Why not let them do it? Like, as long as you, of course, set it up so that the player can't just like fuck it all up and it's just now it sounds terrible. Like, it's always within the parameter of it sounding. Do you know? Like, does that make sense? Like, you can't really, for example, like turn something up so loud that now it's like, oh shit, it's really fucking loud. It'll always be like, sure, you can turn down. Often in games, you can't really turn sounds up, I've noticed. Usually it's just like you can turn them down, but you can't.
Yeah, it starts
increase.
at 100% for most. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's something that I discussed when I had both Marky. You guys know Marky, right?
Yeah.
For 3D Realms. He and Andrew Holschult both are like, okay, you guys have composed games for, you've composed music for competitive games. And like I said earlier, when it comes to arena FPS, I'm turning the fucking music off. Fuck this soundtrack. I'm trying to hear my opponent. And they have to swallow that pill of like, yes, I have worked very hard on this sound of this track or whatever the fuck, but in reality, most players who are serious about the game, most of the people who really seriously engage with this game turn what I did off. Because their role in an arena FPS usually is to just like bring in the new people. And that's an important part, but you work so hard on something, like you said, and, like you master it, you make it perfect, you make it exactly what you think it should be, and then someone just doesn't serve a utility to them. They're not buying what you're making. And that could be both painful, but also something that we have to respect as designers in general.
Yeah, I agree.
Ben?
Yeah, but you have the option of listening to the soundtrack in your car, but you would never like put in a collection of the sound effects and listen to it out of the game.
But I'll say it because I have no fear that Fred is going to, come and hit me with the hammer for this, but like Bombshell, right? Amazing soundtrack. I'll listen to that soundtrack. Like, I would just put it on when I'm listening to music, but there's no chance of me playing that game again. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's
that
aspect of it too.
That ties a bit in the question that the Patreon had of sounding hollow. I think I noticed that as well in some games, not many games, and my thinking always was, maybe they fucked up the mix. Either the sound effects were not good, or they fucked up the mix, or maybe it was even intentional to let the music shine through, so the sound effects were like EQ'd or toned down to not get in the way of the music. Because, I mean, if you hear of new games, especially in the last couple of years, You had behind the scenes of the soundtrack. You had different, or in Steam, you have the option of playing the game or buying the game with a soundtrack. So it has a certain kind of rank, in my opinion, and totally deserved. I mean, I love soundtracks, and I also listen to soundtracks out of the context of the game if it's really good, and I go out of my way to buy those because I want those composers to get the extra money because I really appreciate the work. But I don't think sound has that kind of importance yet. I mean, for some games you start to hear like, yeah, and that game had an amazing soundscape, or like, can you remember that one scene, that one boss, that amazing sounds that he made, especially with, I don't know, maybe Dark Souls games or other kind of games where you have like specific parts where we talked about earlier, the like Ghost of Tsushima, where you really can go on with the sound. But it's, yeah, in the last couple of years, it started to get to this point. But do we know the people behind that? I mean, I know Jeremy Soule did the soundtrack for the Elder Scrolls series, and I know that name because I read that so often in the promo material and the soundtrack, and on every occasion it is mentioned. But like for the Doom games, if it wasn't Mick Gordon, you probably wouldn't have heard it, and if it wasn't like involved in the music as well, maybe no one would have known who Mick Gordon was. I mean, he did good stuff before, but you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, the music is still the main player in the audio field, which is totally fine, but yeah, that might end up giving the sound like a second role to play, and like having to...
Definitely. I've noticed that when people also say, oh, I love the game, the sounds of this game.
Yeah.
Most often they're not talking about the game, the sound effects. They're talking about the music. So yeah, that can be sometimes a little discouraging, but again, like I guess it also I've been thinking about for example, like Slipgate's games and what market it caters to, and because sometimes people joke around with sound being like pretty useless, almost like, oh, people just turn off the sounds anyway. But I think like for people who play, I could imagine at least, I don't know, I haven't confirmed it, but I could imagine that a lot of people who play the games from Slipgates are like older people, like in their 30s, 40s, late 20s, and often have like a higher income and a lot of money to spare. So if they like games as a hobby, I could imagine that these people also cater to the experience and want to like make it really enjoyable. So, I buy a good computer, I'll buy a good big screen, and I'll buy some good speakers. So they kind of get the full experience of, oh, this sounds so good, this looks so good, as opposed to people who's for example, like mobile gaming, where you instantly turn off the sound because you're like, ugh, shut up.
Yeah.
It sounds so shitty, yeah.
The demographic is like...
Yeah,
Exactly.
but it's also like the games made at like 3D Realms and Slipgate, as far as I know, we don't really have like mobile games. They're made for, PC and consoles. And so, the target demographic there, you would imagine that they would be playing either on like with headphones or speakers. So yeah, I mean, definitely the statistics when you look at like mobile gaming and, like the statistically, the amount of people who play games with the sounds off when you take the mobile market into account definitely looks grim.
Yeah.
But yeah, again, like the target demographic that we're sort of in, I think, because like we have gotten for Graven, for example, there are some people who have mentioned the sound design specifically as being very, very nice, and they,
And my theory around these people is at least I hope it is like this, and I hope that the people who play Slipgate games or 3D Realm games are people who enjoy like the full experience, sound included.
That's an interesting thing to bring up because I semi-famously had this argument with Fred last year, like 2020 Realms Deep, when we were talking with Cliffy B, and Fred had this perspective. He had this assumption that, the people who play 3D Realms and Slipgate games in general are like this crowd of, guys who are like 30 something, his age essentially, and are, they have kids now and they've just gotten to that point where they, they're comfortable enough in their job that they can come home and they can play these, retro games that remind them of their childhood. And that's a good demographic. Those are people who have money and can spend it for sure.
Yeah.
But my argument to him was like, that's not the case. Like, if you have, you look at the numbers, you look at the people who are actually engaging with this stuff. And I feel like I'm a little more on the ground because of the nature of how this podcast works. A lot of the people are those people, and a lot of them are like kids, they're like teenagers, 21-year-olds, like that kind of thing, who were like fucking frustrated with the price of graphics cards these days, and they're just like, fuck this, and the price of games in general. It's like, 60, 70, $80 for a new AAA title. And they're just looking for something that like they can play and enjoy. And like maybe their dad or their mom or somebody above them was into Duke Nukem. Hey, this is my story, very specifically, who, turned them on to this stuff at an early age. And then they end up playing these games that remind them of that. And for me, like my dad and I grew up playing Duke Nukem, and I carried that forever. And Doom came along later. Quake came along, around the same time Doom did. And I have a deep respect for these retro games, not only because they're good, but because they're cheap. They have a lot of utility to them. I can keep playing them forever, over and over again. They're not prohibitively expensive, and they're not taxing on my computer.
Yeah.
Right. And I have a pretty nice computer. Like I can play AAA. Don't get me wrong. I got a little bit of money in my bank account, but you know what I mean? Like I'm just saying, like there's so much to be explored here, and there's such a huge market out there of people who feel exactly the same way. Like, I only have this, I can only play the games that fall under my graphics card or my operating system or whatever. And then they end up finding someone like 3D Realms or someone like In the Keep for that reason.
Yep.
Sorry, that was kind of long-winded.
No, that's fine.
It's big. I've never actually thought about like, because my knee-jerk assumption would be that it was like a lot of boomers just wanting to play the games that they played in their childhood. But I've never thought about like the new kind of scene for these kind of games, like a retro revival, which like other game genres have seen a lot of retro revival. A lot of people who've been like wanting like a return of the platformers. And you see games like
there's
like
Rare,
Ahead in Time,
the Rare platformers. God, like there's a whole thing on itch.io right now of people that are actively trying to recreate their nostalgia for that genre.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's also the PS1 crew.
Yeah, the Haunted PS1.
The Haunted PS1 crew, which is amazing. I just played Chasing Static.
Beautiful.
2 days ago.
Gorgeous
Yeah, very
game.
beautiful game. And I'm more in the like older demographic. So for me, I also go back to those games not just because of nostalgia, but because, like you said, like normal games, AAA titles cost like $60. My PC has to be beefed up, and I have like an unspoken rule for myself that for every AAA title I buy 5 indie games, just so I get the right amount of a bit of blockbuster, but mostly labors of love, because you can really feel that.
I feel like also the indie scene is maybe it's an assumption, but I feel sometimes that the indie scene is more daring and bold in the kind of things they try out, where you see this kind of tendency in AAA games that they become kind of samey in some ways. For example, like Assassin's Creed has affected like a lot of games and has like, every AAA games wants these kind of wall runs and all this kind of stuff. And so sometimes the AAA games can also feel like you're buying the same game with a different skin. It's a little maybe too much to say that, but sometimes it can feel very similar in feel and gameplay. And I feel like the indie scene sometimes, are more daring in the kind of stuff they try out, and thus they feel more different and fun and new.
Yeah,
that's
you'll
the
find more
personal
games
take.
that have their own
Nothing close.
identity
Yeah,
in that sense, because like a lot of AAAs have sort of felt like formulaic. Like a game
exactly.
that I really like Horizon Zero Dawn. When I played that, it's a great game, beautiful, and like it has its own things that it does. The side quests are more well written than anything I've tried in Assassin's Creed. But then again, I got sick of Assassin's Creed pretty quickly, so I can't speak for like the newer titles. But it's definitely a thing where you have like big open world collectibles all around, the feathers or flags or anything, and it's like, try to
chores.
collect them all, but it's like it's the same old stuff everywhere, and it's like, why do you make me do this? And like a game I've been starting recently is like Kenna Bridge of Spirits, and I haven't completed it yet. I've seen people having different opinions, but one of the things I really like is sort of with the technology that we have today, it's like sort of the backdrops to a lot of the places. Like it has these more tightly designed levels. Like sometimes you have a more linear path, but then it will breach into this more explorable territory, like still smaller, but you can sort of take different routes around everywhere, and the level will sort of loop back on itself in various ways. But like with the backdrop and the vistas that you'll sometimes get, you have the illusion of the world and the play space that you can't get to. And games used to do this back in the day, and like even newer titles like Dark Souls, for example. Especially like the third one, as you move up to Firelink Shrine, you see these mountains, just way out where you can't get to, but you get like this sense of scale still. And I feel like oftentimes where sort of creating the illusion of a bigger space sort of does the trick better. Playing Final Fantasy 15, for example, is when you can drive from one end to the map over to the other side of it in I think it'll take about 15 minutes. I think I tried once, maybe a bit more, but it's like still, when you have an entire world and you can drive from one end to the next in less than half an hour, at least, like suddenly this entire world becomes very, very small. Whereas in some of the older Final Fantasy titles, you would have like the overworld map, and you would have like what you knew were sort of representations of like characters on a sort of like a world that was sort of shrunk down, but you got like this sense of, they're actually traveling quite far to get to this specific place. And so like they just had a bigger sense of scale rather than making, a lot of games will boast about how many square meters or kilometers that they'll have.
That's a really fun point. It also like reminds me just of like sometimes the journey is not measured necessarily in distance, but sometimes in time. And if you have like a small map but with a lot of content, then you use a lot of time on that content, and thus the journey feels longer. For example, like a game like a Grand Theft Auto Saint Andreas feels like big, but if you look at the map today, it's actually kind of small. And it's funny how like you mentioned, Jonas, a big map doesn't necessarily feel good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the
When it's empty and lifeless, then it's
yeah,
what's the point? Especially
Yeah.
with the older GTA games like also Vice City. I feel
Yeah.
like they really did it amazingly because at first you feel like it's a big wide city, and when you get to know it, you still feel like it's a big city, but
Yeah.
you know your way around it. So if you just look at the map, it's really small, but you have all those memorable little places, and you know, like, okay, if I want to go to there, then I need to go to the airport, and then left, and then there, and in your mind, you fill in like this distance, just like you said, because there's a lot of content there, and you have a lot of memories attached to all those places
Yeah.
where you have had missions. So it was really like using the technology to make it stand out. And I don't know, maybe with big games, it's inevitable that they get to this point because there's a budget and you have to cater to a lot of people.
Yeah.
I'm not really excited about the newest Dark Souls game, or Elden Ring as it's called, because I love the series, and especially the first part just blew me away. Or Demon Souls blew me away, and the first Dark Souls as well, because it was so well crafted, and you had like mountains in the distance, but later on you found out, oh shit, now I'm there. That was the thing I saw on the horizon from the start, and the world building was amazing, and the daringness of just not giving a fuck if the player walks in the wrong direction, goes to the cemetery, he just instantly dies, and it's just like it's just like hell out there, and no one explains anything to you, and that was really refreshing. And now with the newest installments, one by one, it got a bit toned down, and now you have to go to the indie games to get like the real new stuff again.
That's one of the things that our mutual friend Tristan, musician on our wonderful Still of Valkyrie, he's working on a project called Elementalism, which is a very mod project. But they play with that. They actually accomplish exactly what you just said in the Doom engine, where it's like you start off the game and you see these pyramids or these mountains or whatever off in the distance, and they fuck with the skybox so much as like every time you get through a level, it's like, oh, I'm closer and closer to this goal. It's really like just tremendous. But we're kind of getting away from sound design now. We're talking about game design in general, but like these are the things that make people immersed in an experience. So, to go all the way back to our childhoods, it's like Doom is just like, okay, you complete a level, okay, and you have no concept of where you are really in the world unless they give you some sort of visual representation of what that is.
Yeah,
and it's wild. It's very strange that technology, and this is something that you guys were talking about a little bit earlier, technology deeply influences what you are able to do. Like, do you want to have a 40 millibyte game or demo because you bloat it with audio and high fidelity music and all this kind of shit? Or do you make that compromise to, okay, what I'm doing is not so important. We need to tone it down a bit in order to deliver the product in a usable fashion.
I am definitely the kind of person who will try to, as much as I can, bring down the size of it. Like, one of the things I absolutely hate when if I'm on the PlayStation or something, I buy a game, I have to download it, but if it's like 100 gigabyte and I have like, it's like a lot of these games, they don't care about the amount of space they take up, and it's like I hate having to like delete games and install them again, and then they have like the all the patches and everything, and it takes hours, and they're literally like games where it's like, for example, Final Fantasy 15 was one where when I first installed it took quite a while from buying it, even with like having the CD and everything, the Blu-ray disc, to actually being able to play it. And so it was a big decision for me. For like, I haven't played the DLC shit, and I wanted to do that. But like before I did it, like, because it took up a lot of space, and I needed some space to install some other games, and I was like, do I delete this? Maybe I should play through the DLCs if I want to do that, because I know as soon as I delete this, I'm not going to install this again anytime soon. Like, this is going to be gone, and there's a
have to
good
make
chance I
space.
will never get back to it. And it's the kind of thing where when there's like games that don't take up a lot of space, that I really appreciate personally, because it's like, yes, thank you.
Like Sekiro.
Yeah, Sekiro's like 12 gigabytes or something on the PlayStation
Yeah.
5 if you buy it
That's
digitally.
decent.
Yeah.
It can sometimes seem like these companies could maybe think that our game is 100 gigabytes, but it doesn't matter. The new PlayStation has a terabyte of room or something. But if every game company thinks that, then you have 10 games when you are,
And you don't even have that, because some of that space is taken up
of
by
course,
like
like
system.
I remember GTA 5 was the first game that I put the disc in, and then I had to sit while it downloaded content for like 2 hours. And I was like, what the fuck is happening here right now?
It's really fun to think, especially like the consoles, because at least when I grew up, I remember like the difference between a PC and a console was that you could just go home, plug in your cartridge into the Nintendo or whatever, and it just boots up. There's no DLC, download time, or anything. It just plays. Where now it's like it has all the downsides of playing on PC, where it's like, oh shit, you have this day one DLC or something where you have to download 50 gigabytes of content, and it's just no playing today, I guess.
That's something I think about a lot, and it's an advantage we have at Slipgate and 3D Realms and in the Keep in general, is that, you know, we're marketing to the people who want that experience, even if it's not console, but it's just like, you know, retro, small, whatever the fuck.
Yeah.
Because when you sit down at your fucking PlayStation, you realize you have to wait 2 more hours to download the content that you went to GameStop or whatever the fuck and bought the disc for. It's like, what the fuck is this? Yeah. It's a fundamental change in the way that console works, because when I was growing up, and if you go back and you read like Retro Gamer magazine or whatever, it was always about the technology, what fits on the disc, what works for this system, and you tailor the gaming experience to what is available to the person who has it. The internet changed everything. Big time.
Yeah.
Especially with rising speeds and rising storage capacity. People don't seem to care anymore to restrict them in some fashion. But I think everyone knows by now that restriction is a very important part of creativity. If you have like,
God bless you, Ben. That's why we get along so well.
If you have your digital workstation and have like the first time I started with like sound, I already talked about this a little bit, but I started with like, hey, I want to make music, and I bought like lots of instruments and sample packs and had like 200 gigabytes of stuff, and then I was like, okay, now I have 5,000 kicks. Which one do I choose? And I spent like an hour choosing a kick, and then I had the kick, and it totally takes the creativity out of it. And you especially see that with retro games, if they try to get the aesthetic, or if they even go so far as to try, for some companies or for some indie games, they even try to get it on an original cartridge and try to play with the limits and try to, okay, maybe we can make a custom PCB and make the game a bit bigger, but let it run natively on a Super Nintendo or something like that. That really, that makes for such creative games. One example I want to point out here is Micro Mages. I don't know if you guys heard of it. They made Micro Mages is a game for the NES, and you can play it on the original NES in 4-player multiplayer or in single player. And they had a whole like 20 minutes panel talk about how they got, with all the limitations, how they got all that content in, because they have levels and boss fights and all that in co-op mode and also deathmatch mode, and it's just like for the NES, it just blew my mind. And the whole panel and the whole technical talk of it was like the limitations what drove them forward. So how many bytes can we press out of that? How many sprites can we reuse and just flip? And make it even more awesome for like, I don't know what it was, like 46 kilobytes or 228 kilobytes of game, which is just with sound and sprites and multiplayer is, it just blew my mind. And it always goes to show, work with limitations. For Call of Ragnar, I'm doing that with like, I want to have that retro sound. I want to have like this special microphone, and that's why sometimes it takes a lot of time getting a simple single sound out. But the process is fun, and it keeps me on my toes and keeps me working creatively. And I think that's, with all the bigger games, Assassin's Creed is a good example, or Far Cry as well. They are blockbusters, but the gameplay, I don't know, no risks, no really limitations. Make it bigger, make it even more fetch quests. Oof.
Yeah.
It doesn't
It's
sound
very,
that fun.
It's very neat to look at, but it's not very deep often. But by the way, your point about limitations is actually really fun, because it's also especially applicable in sound design, where there exists a million plugins and a million sound libraries and 10,000 microphones, and it's sometimes fun to just like say, hey, what if I'll only use this synthesizer to do it all? Or, for example, like I have a small like a modular synthesizer, a Eurorack. Exactly, and it looks like Moog or something. I don't know, but
it's like a custom format.
Oh, okay. It's bigger than mine.
We'll talk about it later.
But and sometimes also before I'm before making sounds for games, is like for example, like for my own music or something, it's also fun to just say, hey, what if the entire sample library is made on this Eurorack synthesizer?
Yes.
And then I have to work in these kind of fun limitations and discover new stuff that I wouldn't have noticed if I didn't. And I think both Jonas and I have utilized that approach several times, where it's like, we don't have these tools, let's see what we can do without them then.
It's very fun trying to come up with, for example, in Graven, a lot of the enemies we've been working on is like we've had ourselves to sort of do the voice acting.
Yeah,
and it's very fun trying to find what new ways can I mangle my voice, pitch it up and down, which filters going through it, and I remember we had like the Game Awards demo December last year. We had the Maya Reaver in. And at this time, I'm living with two other friends, one of whom has a very different, daily schedule than me, and in in an apartment with very bad acoustics, and trying to get this like deep roaring voice without waking people, or having to tell people you can't use your keyboards, you can't do anything. Even one of my friends who was in a room at the other side, it was so reverberant that I had to wait until they were either done on the computer or done sleeping if they were snoring, because you could hear it. And then I would try to sort of make, especially if like one of my friends they were like sleeping at some hours during the day, I couldn't just go all out like just roaring, so I try to make my voice as deep and try getting these roaring, like pitching them down, or doing this and that with them through filters and just whatever I had. We've been using Ableton Live a lot for a lot of our sound designs. And it's it's very fun when it's like, okay, like we have two voice actors and a whole lot of enemies. How many different voices can we do for these? How many different things can we get out of?
So far, I think we've been pretty
we've gotten away with
differentiating. When we tell people that it's just our two voices, most people are like, huh. So I want to think that we have, so far at least, differentiated the different voices pretty nice.
It's one of the things that I love the most about, I would say, game design in general, is that when you truly tremendous things come from necessity, they don't come from options or freedom.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a certain amount of like, you know, oh wow, I'm free to do whatever I want. But like as a producer, when I tell someone, do whatever the fuck you want, I don't care. You know, about 50% of the time, it turns out great. You know, you get a guy like Ben who's just like, just do whatever you want, man. And he comes at you every time where it's like, this is awesome. And then you get some people who are just like, they need not guidance, but they need to just be, they need to have their parameters set for them.
Yeah.
And that's when the magic happens. That's when it's like, okay, you can't do this. You can't do that. You don't have access to this. The budget is this. The budget is not what you want it to be. You can only use this keyboard. You can only use this synthesizer. You can only use this sound library, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And then magic starts happening because they're like an animal fighting out. And that sounds fucked up, but like when you're an animal fighting your way out of a cage, you come up with a lot of creative ways to get out of that cage.
Yeah.
As opposed to you're free, go frolic like Bambi in the forest, the endless forest. And they're like, I don't know what to do because I have a million different options.
Yeah, it's like a white paper
Totally.
syndrome.
Yeah.
Total freedom is actually hell because total freedom always leads to people creating problems for themselves because you always need a problem to fix. And if you don't have any problems, you end up starting creating them yourself. So
Dude, I struggle with even picking a damn charity for the Pigeon Classic. I'm just like, there's so many charities out there.
Yeah.
Which one is the right one? What's the most ethical thing to do? I don't know. I'm scared. Like,
It's
it's easier if
also
someone just gives you like here's 10 to pick from. Pick one. Okay, done.
or
just
like a
choose
list
the
of
charity.
constraints for you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
or like a list of constraints to like you can only use these courses or only give it to 5 of these countries or something like that. And I think it's important if you understand that this is a basic human thing, that you can't run away from this, that you can start to create for yourself a kind of work ethic and integrate it into your work. And that's something I've learned over the last years to incorporate in my work. If I get something like from you, like just do whatever you want, make sounds whatever you want, and then I will start to actually think hard about what kind of constraints I want to set for myself. And especially with Stellar Valkyrie, for example, I want to make it really like in a lo-fi way, not as polished, and just bang it out and see what comes out, and like record the first thing and then try to go as far as I can and hold on to that. And I mean, if it doesn't work, we can throw it out later, but oftentimes it does work from the first idea. And that makes me really focus, because the first time I'm recording something or the first time I'm working on a sound, I'm like, okay, this is the one sound I'm gonna make. I'm gonna use this one, and I'm constraining myself to this one approach now. And that's why most of the time it works really well. And
and you're part of a team of people who are used to playing the hand they're dealt, right? Like, so you're used to, like Scumhead is like, he will be like, I want to work in this engine. What are the parameters of this engine? What can I do? How can I express my art through that? Uber Gawai is used to working in Z Daemon. So actually he's like well above, I won't say punching above his weight, because that's not a correct way to say it. He's like, he has more freedom than he's ever had, really, because he's working in GZ Doom or Unity or whatever the fuck it is. And Tristan is used to being, like part of mod communities. And I'm just like, just make whatever music you think works for this, man. No, I don't care.
No.
And I trust you. I think you're I try to do that. Like, I try to find myself around creative people who are like you said, they will gate themselves. They will put parameters on themselves.
Yeah, it's also kind of like, just like you said before, like if you have a lot of options, you find like 10. Also, as you alluded to before, like if difficulties in sort of like when people say, oh, I want a beefier sound or something, that you instead try to narrow it down. So you come with like 3 options for them to choose from and say, okay, I've made like 3 very distinct different sounds. And here's the beef. So pick one of them. And
Isn't it funny when they don't pick the beef?
Yeah. That's the
They
most
pick
fun.
the chicken.
yeah,
Make it warmer,
yeah.
and then they use the total. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, man.
No, but it's true though. It's like you come in and say, "Oh, I want meat." It's like, okay, here's beef, here's chicken. I actually made some salmon over here. Take your pick. And and so they choose and narrow it down. And it's like, oh, we want the chicken. I'm like, you sure don't want the beef? Okay, the chicken, sure. Okay, like how do you want me to season it? Like what's
my
next,
God.
right?
That's so fucking funny.
Yeah, but it's that's kind of like the thing, right? That when they talk about like they can mean a million things when they because what they mean when they say beefy could be something totally different from what you think that is. Like usually I would think beefy is more like low end and crisp is more like the top end.
Bass, baby. They want that boom. Like yes.
Yeah. We need
It's
more.
funny as,
I worked at. I did an internship at Bedtime Digital Games, and one of the things they would say a lot was like, "We need more power," and it was like no matter what sound I was working on, like some sort of attack sound, ability sound, anything really, like everything needed more power, and I was like, "You say that word so much, it's lost all meaning," and. But like
and also, if everything is powerful, nothing is powerful. Because
yeah, exactly.
That's a very fundamental truth in everything that has to do with the design. If you play at full volume all the time, nothing matters.
Yeah.
You have to have peaks and valleys, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You want like variation. It's also like when we talked about like the first gun in a game, you don't want that to be the beefiest sounding gun. Like you want that to be this sort of visual and auditive progression to these sounds. Same like a thing in like a level. Let's say the haunted house kind of example that we used, where it's like you start in one place and then you move through like this forest and you hear like creatures. Then you get to another part and suddenly like the creatures are like disappearing. And then you get to like the house. It's like, you sort of tell a story as the player goes through this level until they reach the haunted house. And when they enter, it's like, boom, like from when you started and there was like life and birds and everything to when you're in that house, like you sort of want to have this progression and optimally that would be, both visually, auditively, and even in gameplay, right, as well. Like in the beginning you have maybe more freedom, and then it constrains you, and then it locks you in this house, and then it's like, okay, now get out, survive. Whereas at the beginning it's like, oh, you're fine, you're safe. And yeah, it's like especially when you put these constraints on yourself. It allows for this sort of it's like pushing back on the white paper syndrome. Like you have all the options in the world, but it's like, okay, I can't pick from a million options. Like I don't know what I'm missing out on, but from like five options, 4.
It's the difference between being a scientist and engineer, right? So if you're a scientist and you're told like go out and solve any problem you want, then you could kill your whole life just like pondering different aspects of reality. An engineer is told solve this problem with science or with math or with physics, and then they just solve the problem
with this constraints, with this budget.
Right. And what I'm saying is like in your guys' case, like as sound designers, it's like what you're being asked to do is usually not what you necessarily like. You didn't wake up on Monday and say like, I want to be doing what I'm doing on Friday. You're just asked to solve a problem for someone else. You do it, and that's how you make a living. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like that's fucking fantastic. It's just like it's a different mindset because you're ultimately usually bound by the point of view of someone else, of what they want, of what they need or they think they need for
the systems.
their project.
There is actually, though, a benefit with sound being slightly ignored because that also means that we are often given free rein to something like try different things, because nobody is really saying. They just say, "Oh, we need a gun sound for this." They wouldn't go into specifics. Oh, it needs to be hard hitting and blah blah blah, and it needs to sound like this, and giving a lot of examples. Oftentimes, it's just like go nuts, and there can be that benefit with us having like more room to play around, and sometimes we also like to see. Is there like problems that we're not dealing with currently, but we could be alleviating by designing it in a certain way? So there's that engineer aspect to it where you solve the task at hand, but there is also somewhat of a scientist aspect to it where you kind of go looking for problems in the project and see, could this be done in a more optimal way or something? Yeah. So, because people don't really,
we actually had, there was like a weapon in Graven where what we like, the way it was set up was I think it gone through some iteration as well, but like they tested it and they were like, oh my god, this is really loud, turn down the volume. And then I went in looking at it and it was like, oh, this was actually set up as that start loop release thing, but it's like it works sort of like a Gatling. It shoots a lot of projectiles out, but it works more like a laser in a sense. Like what we wanted wasn't a sound for each specific projectile being fired from this thing. It's like, no, we wanted like a loop. It's like if you design, let's say, Gatling guns or something like that will often be designed where you will have like a little loop that will be playing. It won't be like each individual projectile being fired will not have its own sound. And so, you go in and you sort of sometimes look at things and they're like, oh, they think this is the problem. We need to turn down the volume. And you go in and you're like, no, actually, like the system for this, we need to change that to the start loop release system that we have over here. Instead, because that will allow us to, save voices, have better control, and just get the desired effect and the desired sound that we're looking for here.
Yeah, a Gatling gun is no different than what you were talking about earlier when you were talking about car engines, right? Like, how does it sound when the car fires up? Yeah. Once you meet, once you've reached maximum RPM, it's the same sound. Who gives a shit? Yeah. But the build up to that, each gear shift, or in a Gatling gun skate, like the start of like whatever the fuck. That's the important part of the sound. Everything after that is just a loop. You're right. It's really really insightful on your part to think about it that way.
Yeah, it is like you also have to think of like, what system is going to be playing the sound. And the thing was that it had this sort of start loop release, I think. And then there had been some work done, and then they just set up the start sound for each projectile. But of course, like the sound for the sort of start is made to sort of fade into the looping sound. So it's kind of long, and for how quickly they were playing the sound, so using some of the debugging tools, you could just see like all the voices just being filled up immediately, and it was like, oh, you have to troubleshoot and like, okay, what you think is wrong here, guys, is actually not what's wrong. What we need to do is this. But it's also kind of a fun thing, like with sort of like the limitations as well, like the systems that have to play back these sounds, like we have to take them into account or try to work with what we have, and if that potentially doesn't work, it's like, okay, how could we set up like a system that plays back this audio the way that we want to achieve? Like, what is it that we actually want to achieve here? Say like the thing where if you would be making, let's say, a Gatling gun, you would think that, oh, each projectile will need its own sound. But like classically, it is made with the start loop release. So So that's like one of the things as well in terms of like the implementation part of the process. Like we have like production of audio, post-production, and then implementation. Like this would be in that category of like we have to think about the implementation as well when we are, recording and working with the sound post-production as well. Because if we don't, like potentially we just waste a whole lot of time figuring out that right. So we actually need all you coders to redesign like how all of these things are being fired off. And we also need more time to get the sounds in.
Yeah, because we often
the
work like
implementation.
iterative, where
we
want to implement it and test it out, because it's kind of hard to design a sound in the context of itself. We want to hear how it sounds in relation to the rest of the game, and especially the system that fires it. So that we don't do redundant work and just waste our time.
And depending on the system, like when you make like for example, the start loop release, there's like a way that you would approach making, those sounds. It's sort of like the same approach, but whether or not your start going into the loop, going into the release, whether or not that works, that's very much an iterative process where we want to be able to put it in. We want to be able to actually play around with it in engine and test it out in various ways to see how does it sound if like the player just clicks incessantly, like does this still work? Or
with the example, for example, of the gun that has the start loop release, for example, we need to iterate on how long is the start sequence exactly. So how long does this wind up for the minigun or whatever have to be, and we need it to be at a working state for us to actually implement it and try it out, and iterate on it from that point. Because there's a lot of variables, like how long should this sound play, and how loud should this be, and blah blah blah. It really is like the last in the pipeline sound. Oh yeah, go ahead.
So we've been talking for 2 hours and 40 minutes now. I want to be conscientious of the fact that you guys. It's like 125 something, 130 your guys' time. I do need to be conscientious of that. I have learned so much through the course of this conversation, just like picking all of your brains and like getting your ideas and like how you approach the art of what you do. But I think we all need to go to bed. And we can do it part 2. Hopefully I can get Marky or some other people to, join us and like really expand upon what we've talked about so far today.
Yeah, for sure.
Sure. Yeah. And you guys have been tremendous. Ben, I love you. You know that. You're part of my team.
Same, man. Same.
Big ups. Magnus, I had so much fun just getting to meet you when I was in Denmark. So like,
yeah, you too, man.
No, dude, you're like amazing. And your philosophy on things. Like I was telling you, before I actually this is pre-Ben being involved in Stellar Valkyrie, I was trying to, just blossom and make my own sound design. And you were one of the few people who were like, no, that what you did was sound design. Like, that's good. You're encouraging, though I was probably an idiot. No, Ben is probably going to laugh because I know he's erased a lot of what I did. But,
no, man, I've enhanced it.
Enhanced it. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Okay. But
no,
you
man,
know what I mean.
It was a great effort. Really?
Yeah.
It was.
Having just dipped my toe into what you guys do, I appreciate deeply how difficult the job really is. And Jonas, we got a million things to talk about between you and I, but like for real, like, dude, I respect you so much as a professional, and your philosophies and the way that you think about what you do is just truly magnificent. And all of you guys are tremendous. I'm so proud to have, brought 2.5 more, almost 3 hours worth of content to the people who are going to listen to this. And hopefully one of the people, if there's, 100, 200, 300, 1,000, some percentage of the people who hear this will go on to be as great at what they do as any of you guys are. I really mean that. Yeah.
Thanks,
for sure,
too, man.
And likewise,
All right,
man, I
hugs and
really
kisses.
dig the podcast, but digging into the episodes and such.
Yeah, no. I'll try my best.
Yep.
Yeah.
Maybe, at some point you'll move to Denmark. Let's see.
I'll see you guys.
We'll do the live
February.
Do
Yeah,
that.
the live version.
Yeah,
Live.
yeah,
We'll fly Ben up, or like, have him take a train.
I'm gonna drive up there,
Exactly.
man.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
also,
We'll also
just a podcast without any. It'll just be us in the same room.
we'll smash
right.
some two board classics and just fucking see what happens.
Yeah.
I bring all my microphones and we make like a recording
Oh
session.
yeah.
Yes. All right. Much love, everybody.
Yeah, too.
Since we spent so much time talking about him, I thought it would only be appropriate to play some music by Immorpher at the end of this episode. So here it is. You can go check out all of his stuff over on Bandcamp or wherever he posts his. I'll put links in the episode notes. Don't worry. Also, huge thank you to Ben and Magnus and Jonas for joining us and spreading the knowledge and letting me learn all about what did I call it? Sonic psychology. Yeah. So, I'll have links to all those guys and places you can find them. And definitely go check out all the games that they're working on, especially Ben's, because they're also mine. I'm kidding. But no, it was fun, and I hope that you enjoyed it. I want to say thank you to everyone out there listening currently, and I also want to say thank you to our supporters. So, Shannon, Ben, Bridge, Anthony, Mike, Zan, Lord Revan, Fred, Brandy, Jack, Robert, Graceless Dragon, Red Eyes, Brad, Dots, Moose Paul, Flambeau, Greg Simon, and of course, Immorpher, whose music you're listening to right now. All of these are amazing people, and I thank all of you for, giving to the show, supporting us. If you're listening and you're like, how do I get on that list? All those people that I just named either are Patreon supporters or, contribute something to the show, because they're awesome. I don't know why they do it, but they do. And you can too, inthekeep.com/support. You can also, check out all of our cool stuff that we're making, our other podcasts, and grab some merch from our merch tab. Whatever you want to do. Doesn't matter. The best thing you can do to support the show is just to listen and then tell people how fucking awesome it is. Hopefully they'll get into it as well. That's pretty much all I got. I hope y'all enjoyed the Pigeon Classic. If you didn't, go back and watch it all now. And till next time, I love you. The Drowned God Cathala loves you. You should stay in the keep.